On this episode of the WildFed Podcast.
Following those animals' tracks, where do they go? What are they eating right now? Why are they walking by this spot day after day? Those are the things that help you begin to feel like you're part of that landscape.
We see the narrative around hunting does need to be reframed. I'm sort of fascinated by killing, but I also don't want to glorify it. It's ancient, and it's very interesting how we struggle with it.
This is not meant to be divisive. I'm a hunter, and I'm on hunting's team.
We were hunting before we were a species. I sometimes try to say that to people. I don't know if it lands, like before we were a species.
Additive mortality is really hard to get to. By hunting alone, you're never going to get rid of the pigs.
Food and story have never been dissociated before in history ever until now. Once you don't have a story, everything's just a commodity.
And the story is so much more real and interactive than any trip into the supermarket.
Episode 86 of the WildFed Podcast, Who Are We? Hunting and the Stories We Tell with Arthur Haines is brought to you by Surthrival. With Father's Day coming up, all men's favorite supplements at Surthrival are 15% off until June 20th. That's 15% off colostrum products, 15% off elk antler products, and of course 15% off pine pollen products too with the coupon code ADAPT15. Get Dad some colostrum to keep his immune system primed and his digestion healthy and strong. Get him some elk antler to keep his dad body looking sharp with its ability to upregulate metabolism and assist in rapid recovery from those dad bod workouts. And most important, get him some pine pollen with its rich testosterone content and phytoandrogens, because all dads need healthy T levels. Find all these incredible supplements and more at surthrival.com and use the coupon code ADAPT15 for 15% off for Father's Day. Today's episode is also brought to you by the Hunter's Journey online mentorship program. Whether you're still deciding if becoming a hunter is right for you, you're ready to start a hunting journey of your own, or you're a beginner hunter working towards your first harvests, getting started hunting can be daunting. Where do you start? What gear and knowledge do you need? What do you do when your strategy isn't working? And most importantly, how do you hunt ethically and sustainably? An ancient and essential part of the hunter's journey is having a mentor to pass on their decades of experience and guide you on your own journey. Our guest Chris Gilmore from episode 58 on tracking and awareness has created a comprehensive, one-of-a-kind online mentorship program called The Hunter's Journey. If you want to feel the empowerment of harvesting your own food from the landscape and you want to do it with ethics and sustainability as your guiding principles, you're going to want to check out thehuntersjourney.com. Chris is currently running an early bird special, and as an offer to all WildFed listeners, the coupon code WildFed100 gets you an additional $100 off the course. Head over to thehuntersjourney.com and use the coupon code WildFed100 to learn to hunt with skill, respect, and heart. I'm Daniel Vitalis, and you're listening to the WildFed Podcast, a show about reconnecting with nature through hunting, fishing, foraging, and food. WildFed. Food is all around you. Arthur Haines, a recurring guest of the WildFed Podcast and TV show, is back today, and he's here to talk about hunter attitudes and relationships to animals and the landscape, and how that influences the non-hunting public's perception of hunting as a lifestyle. Hunting is a tremendous responsibility, especially today with such a small part of the public participating. The way we hunt, talk about hunting, write and post about it, and behave on and off of wild landscapes all influences how hunting is perceived and therefore how it will be or won't be carried into the future world. This is part of an ongoing conversation that Arthur and I have been having for a while personally, and we wanted to share some of that with you today. Now, as a side note, hunting is about as ancient as anything human is. The legacy reaches back to the earliest humans and before. So I don't want to give the impression that either of us thinks we have something new to contribute to this conversation. We don't. Hunting is bigger and older and more important than that. But how we behave and how the public sees hunting and hunters does matter, and that's what this conversation's about. Also, as hunters, we want to fully respect those who have been carrying the torch into the modern world. That said, we both have some criticisms of some of what we see in the modern hunting era, and we think some of those things should be addressed. Not to divide us, but rather to strengthen our relationship with the non-hunting public. And it's in that spirit that we're having this candid conversation. But Arthur and I have also been friends and colleagues for a long time. So in this episode, we're catching up on a lot of other topics too, like our maple syrup seasons, our recent hog hunts, Arthur's experience at Buffalo Bridge, a program that assists North American indigenous bison hunters with their processing efforts after their harvests, and the story of a moose hunt that Arthur guided last season in Maine. So I hope you enjoy this conversation and know that while you're listening, I'm busy working on season 2 of the WildFed TV show. It's a very exciting time for me and my team, and I can hardly wait to bring you another season of awesome hunting, fishing, foraging, and food television content soon. Arthur Haines, welcome to the show.
I always love the introduction. It's so serious.
I get kind of... Yeah, you're right.
But thanks
it's
again.
Rehearsed is what it is.
It sounds like a game show host.
That's how you start to feel after a while doing these things. Welcome back, man. Let's start with a quick spring in Maine admonition. May you feel every tick. It's that time again.
We can work it in with some tribal curse. May you feel every tick before your last elder dies.
You want to give any context for that, or we'll just let that hang?
It's a Georgian curse. May your loneliness come to you before your last elder dies.
Wow.
It's something that Sarah sometimes brings up from her learning from Stephen Jenkinson, and it's obviously speaks to the times that we're in.
Yeah. Wow. Well, that's heavy. So today we got a cool topic queued up. Something you and I have been discussing for it's been a few months now.
But our lives,
yeah,
in a way.
Yeah.
But we've been talking about this particular one more and more as we've, I feel like, gotten more into not just hunting, but also the guiding end of it and getting exposed to even more people through that arena.
Yeah, and I'd say for me now, with the TV show being out there, I'm kind of in the industry now, and it's some things have changed for me as far as like realizing the import of what I might say or do in the sense of like how it could affect hunting.
Yes.
In general, it's perception. So, and obviously the topic today is the perception of hunters, both by the public, but also I think a lot of how people self-identify too as hunters, and the approaches that they take psychologically and verbally, and behaviorally to the hunt. But I just want to kind of first just get a little caught up with you, man. I think people imagine you and I are just hanging out every single day, and even though it's just probably about an hour and 10 minutes between us, it's enough space that we don't get to see each other all that often. So it's the end of maple season. How'd you do?
We did very well this year. I was up until midnight last night. When you get the sap boiling, especially this time of year, as we were talking before we put the headphones on, the sap is inoculated with all these bacteria, and it's a lot warmer during the day, and you sort of want to get it boiled in a timely manner, and that means all of it that's out in your sugar bush. And it just so happened that last night, to get it all boiled, we were up until midnight finishing it up, because if we waited too long, we might have to discard that sap, and that means we're sort of throwing out future syrup.
Yep. And a lot of labor too,
It's so much. It's all that same thing with like wild rice, with acorns, with maple syrup. When people say like, hey, I'd like to buy a jar of maple syrup from you. It's like, sure.
Do you just laugh or what?
$100.
Just laugh at that. Because it's like, I can't. I don't want to approach this. I was thinking about this, Arthur. You've been telling me, dude, you got to make maple sugar. You've been saying it for a while. And the last time we spoke, you were like, Sarah and I do about half sugar, half syrup. You've been like teasing it to me. But I got really into the craft, and I got some good compliments from chefs on my syrup. And
nice.
That made me want to go even more into the craft. Like I'm sort of looking at it like the Brad Pitt, Angelina Jolie retirement at the vineyard kind of plan.
Yes.
My sugar bush. I think the name. I'm going to call it the Golden Bear Sugar Bush. But anyway,
nice.
I love the craft of making the syrup, so I hadn't gotten into the sugar. But I made the sugar the other day because Avani started baking cookies, and I was like, well, you can't buy sugar. This is absurd. I must make it. So I go into Hannaford the other day. That's our local supermarket. And I walk over to the sugar aisle just to see, like, how much does sugar cost? I was floored, truly floored, because you could imagine that maple sugar and, like, I think of maple sugar as like a health food. Now, that's probably stretching things a little bit. This is a lot of sucrose. But I definitely don't think of white sugar or brown sugar as a health food.
Right.
But then I'm thinking, like, okay, somebody, who's not got a stake in the game could easily go like, well, I don't get it. This is the juice of a plant, and this is the juice of a plant dehydrated and crystallized. What's different? And I started thinking about that, and then I was thinking, well, in Hawaii, I've seen big sugar plantations where they burn it, and they burn all the plastic tubing right into the ground, and the soil's like ultra depleted, and there's been all this history of slavery and all the awful stuff with sugar. But still, a pound of sugar is like $1.15 or something.
It's unfathomable to me, and it's
unfathomable.
It's a good example of the externalized costs. There used to be forests and other natural habitats there, which is the one great thing about the maple syrup. The forest is intact.
Yeah. So also, it's not just that it's cost that much, but that it can be delivered to Maine, and because think about it, it's got to get shipped to Maine. It's got to get merchandised on a shelf. It's got to be brought into inventory, merchandised on a shelf. All of that shelf space, like $1 something. But anyway, I realized as I started thinking about it, it's like once you commodify it, you start thinking like somebody wants to buy it. Okay, how much can I sell it for? You start down that road, and before you know it, you're cutting corners that you would never cut for yourself or your family. And eventually, that's how you end up like Monsanto being willing to poison the earth that they also live on. Right? It's such a weird road to go down.
You're right. I mean, the point is to earn a profit, and you start doing these various turns, like you mentioned, turns you would never take before to earn more of this money. As you know.
Because we're smart, though. Because humans are smart. So we go, if I'm going to do this for profits, I will. It's not because
I'm
going to
maximize profits.
It's because we're thinking it through. But it's a dangerous slippery slope. That's for sure. And you and I both have these, plastic-free sugar bushes, which we do kind of have a world now where if you wanted to market it, I guess you could kind of be like,
totally
it's artisanal and hipster or whatever. But, you would no way you could be commercially viable without going down the vacuum tubes and the last sugar bush I toured, all of the tubing had sensors at every tree reading the pressure inside the tubes, and it was all computerized.
You get in the North Maine woods, and it all comes down to this central holding tank, and then this massive 18-wheeler with this huge tanker comes in to pump it out. And then they go off.
I know that sugar bush you're talking. Is that on the Golden Road or the Grand Marsh Road?
Oh, I'm trying to remember. I think it's Grand Marsh or near it. You're Bruno Road. You're getting way out toward
middle
one of the lakes we fish.
And it's weird because you're driving through all like spruces,
and then you all of a sudden to hit this slope, and it's all sugar maples with yellow birches and other things mixed in.
Anyway, I'm excited about the sugar thing, and so thanks for getting me on top of that. And it's also one of the weird things about that is when you're heating up the sap. We heated it to about 260, 262, something like that, to get it to where it starts, that, I guess really to where you get the water level low enough. That must be why. But boiling a liquid at that much higher than water's boiling point, you're like, well, I'm doing science right now. This is not regular cooking.
Yeah, it's like when we make syrup and we're going to jar it in the glass jars, it's there it is. I'm looking for about 219.5 Fahrenheit. You know what I mean? There's the temperature. Okay, pour it off.
Yeah.
But of course, when you start making the sugar, man, it's getting really hot.
Yeah.
Like scalding.
The first time you think you must be doing it wrong. That's what I was thinking. I was like, okay, I'm ruining a liter of syrup here.
And when you hit that, you go past the foam stage and you get to this like slurry or taffy stage right before it starts to granulate, you're like, I've ruined it. The whole thing, it's a pile of mud. What have I done to it?
Sam's book said, you'll see a white streak and then suddenly it'll begin. Yeah. And all of a sudden I saw this streak, which wasn't quite white, but it was like a tan streak. And
it's
all of a sudden
lighter colored.
It just starts turning into crystals. I mean, it's amazing. So yeah, thanks for that. But what else you got on the horizon? You just gotten back from, I think you and I both have hog hunted since we saw each other.
Yes.
And then you went to, is it Buffalo Bridge?
Buffalo Bridge is the name of the event. The Treaty of 1855, for those tribes that have been able to fight for their treaty rights, are allowed to hunt on this minuscule piece of land that sits between the acreage of Yellowstone National Park, and then the untold acreage. I don't even know how much is that the ranchers and the national forests. And essentially,
who owns this land? It's public?
Some of it is public, but the ranchers highly influence who can use that land, right? And so it's private land as well as land that we all own, national forest land that is sometimes rented out essentially to the local ranchers. So there are various gates and fences that prevent the buffalo that are migrating out of Yellowstone during the winter to this particular area near Gardner, Montana, where snow depth is just really low. And I don't know...
That's why the animals go there.
Yeah, I don't know all of the climate factors that create this, but there are grasses that are available to them in the middle of the winter. And so there's buffalo there, and sometimes you'll see quite a few animals. When I say quite a few, I'm talking hundreds, not the quite a few of the past.
Right.
But pronghorn, elk.
There's a lot today, though, to think about.
Yeah.
Still, because you don't see migrating herds of animals today.
Yeah, it was so different because there's elk everywhere. We did see mule deer, obviously. We heard wolves one night. Pronghorn were there as well. And those are just such a cool animal to me.
To me, that's not... I don't think of it as part of the American menagerie. It just
looks like something else.
When I see it, I'm like, oh yeah, those are here too. Like,
yeah, they're so amazing.
Like squeaked through the Pleistocene extinction.
It's so crazy. So while we were there, there were Yakima, Nimipu, which is the Nez Perce, Crow, Blackfoot, and Umatilla, I think, were the groups of natives that we saw there. And essentially this was just started by a small, I'll say, group of women. I think it was just a couple of people at first, and it grew into a core group of women, which makes it really interesting. The event isn't spearheaded by men.
Right.
It's run by women, so it comes across very different and much more communal. Than any other event I've ever been to. Right. Everybody's participating and helping out with everything. It's very, very cool. But what happens is if the buffalo happen to cross this very small piece of land.
How big is that very small
piece? And I don't know.
Miles or?
Oh, no. We're talking...
acres?
Acres.
Measured in acres.
It's tiny. It's hundreds of yards long, and it's tiny.
Really? It's just a little corridor.
It's a little tiny spot. And if the buffalo happen to move through there, during the morning or during the evening, and native hunters are present, they shoot. And they try to coordinate. I talked to a lot of them because the native people there were really just super polite, super willing to talk about what goes on there. It was really wonderful.
Wow.
And but anyways, they'll try to organize a shoot where elders and people who have never shot before go first. You would think that there would be shots and then all of the buffalo would just run away, but that doesn't always happen. One day that we were there, 23 buffalo were shot in this relatively small area. And what we do is we simply go out and we offer help. Skinning, butchering.
Question. Was these women who created the system by which this hunt is happening, or the women created the system by which you guys go there as part of Buffalo Bridge?
Yep, we just walk out, and usually when you can tell, there might be certain, they're mostly gentlemen hunters, so I'm not trying to stereotype. I think they were all male hunters while we were there within the First Nations people. Some of them are just doing their thing, and it's clear they're just doing their thing. And others, there's some hesitation. They're just like us. Some of them are learning to hunt for the first time. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And we just go out and say, do you want help? We're here to help. And it's stated up front, we're not looking for anything in return. There's no expectation of anything in return.
And they all expect you to be there.
At this point, they know that we're coming.
Right.
And I keep saying we. This is my first year
If I was up in the Northwoods and I shot a moose, I was solo and it's on the ground, and all of a sudden a bunch of people came up and said, I have no expectation of anything. Would you like help? I'd be like, yes.
And that's exactly because these animals, some of these are really big animals. They're so crazy, these humps of meat on their back. It's this fin of bones extending up off the vertebrae.
Vertebral processes, right?
It's so crazy.
The fin of bones are their vertebral processes.
It stands up so high that it looks like a stegosaurus back.
You see it once you've got all the meat off and they're butchered.
And so we help. And they be very clear about what they'd like help with, and if they don't want help, everybody I met said, "Oh, that would be wonderful. Thank you so much." They're all looking for help. And we obviously skin and gut if necessary. Sometimes we did a gutless method at first of removing parts of the animal, leaving the organs intact, so there's no...
In your head, are you kind of like... I mean, obviously you're there to help, but are you also kind of like, I hope they leave the rest of those guts and I'll just dig in around there?
This is what happens. Sometimes there's a gift of hides.
Okay.
Sometimes there's a gift of meat. Sometimes there's gifts of organs.
Bones?
The carcasses mostly get left. Sometimes things get dragged off. And of course, like...
Because I'm like marrow bones there, man.
Leg bones get taken off as the animal gets quartered up.
Oh, they're taking quarters. Yeah. Okay.
But then, so long as there's no buffalo in the area, we might go back midday when we're not going to interfere with anything and salvage through these gut piles. And it's amazing. Sometimes there's hearts and livers left. But we went back and got stomachs because there were people that were cooking these things. And it was really cool.
Cooking the stomachs?
Yeah, tripe.
Yep.
But there was a couple of different kinds because there's also this one that was like a notebook with loose leaf pages.
The way the crenulations
it was so crazy. And all of these are edible. Also went back and scavenged fat. And sometimes on the buffalo, the fat is yellow.
Oh, wow.
Like the butter.
Yeah, vitamin A.
It's so crazy. And
is it tallow or is it not like a lard, right? It's waxy.
It's very saturated. Yep. And amazing. And if the hunters leave the pelvis and the spine and that kind of thing, and there's meat there, they'll take it and go back, boil it for a while so they can pick the meat off and then can it.
Yeah.
And do bone broths. And so you go back to camp, which is just a mile away from where this tiny little parcel of land that the indigenous have access to. And there's hides being scraped. There's canning going on here. There's fat rendering here. Just all this stuff going on.
In your camp?
Yes.
Or the indigenous camp or the indigenous, they bring it back to their community?
Yeah, they tend
Are they camping?
Some of them are coming from states away, like Washington.
Okay.
And I don't know where they're staying. I'm guessing they're in hotels.
They're sort of going back to their community, and everybody from the Buffalo Bridge is...
Yes.
Yeah. Racially, is the group at the Buffalo Bridge mostly white folks, or
almost exclusively? Yeah.
Okay. Interesting.
With unlike what you would expect if you were to do an event like this in the East, if you had Moose Bridge, it would be all these guys with some women. There, it's 65%, maybe more women.
Yeah, that's cool.
Because of the core, founding.
So earlier when you said it, when it was started by women. You were talking about the Buffalo Bridge part.
Yes, I am.
Question about the hunt itself.
Yes.
I'm sorry if I'm interrupting your flow here.
No.
This is not a continuous hunt that goes back to that treaty, because there must have been a big break in it when there wasn't enough animals. Then there was the national park was set up. Then they migrate out of there, and somebody dug up the treaty and said, we want these rights back.
As I understand, that's the case. And so Yellowstone is essentially...
It's sad in a way, but it's also kind of cool that they were able to get this back in a sense. That's really neat.
Yellowstone is saying something to the effect that we can sustainably have about 2,000 animals within this park. So animals that exceed that, including these ones that migrate out of the park into this area along the Yellowstone River. This is in the northern part of the park. The park has a big fenced area that you can see, and they lure them in with like hay and alfalfa. I think that some animals are used to start new herds, but as I understand, again, a lot of these hit the slaughterhouse.
Wow.
but not indigenous slaughterhouses.
Yeah.
And so I'm always really happy
When it goes to them.
when the animals come out and pass through this parcel.
Do the indigenous hunters have any kind of quota or tags, or is it?
There is some sort of tag system.
Okay, so they've got something worked out with
Yes.
the biologists on
Yes.
this.
And man, when you're there, it's really crazy. There's not just tribal wardens, but there's local wardens, local
Yeah.
police officers.
This must be quite an event.
There's all this in there, and there are monitors, and
Yeah.
there's just all these people lined up along the road.
All right, so in some sense, you got this ultra-modern thing going on, but then sort of what you described at the camp, you've got this sort of tinge of ancient feeling
Oh, it's
going on
very,
too.
very cool. We went out one of the nights and did a ceremony praying for the buffalo. And it was amazing. There were songs that were sung that had been essentially created by the women who were in
Yeah,
the circle.
yeah, cool.
And we had, there was a buffalo rib cage, because there's remains all over the
Yeah.
place. And a heart was brought out and put back into this rib cage to sort of bring this animal back to life.
Wow.
With these mullen torches. And we just
Oh, wow.
all spoke and prayed. And that was the only night that I was there, for a week. That was the only night that wolves were howling in
Oh,
the
yeah.
distance.
Right on.
It was so amazing.
Wow, it's cool. I saw that photo of you guys. It looked like, it reminded me of like when people go to one of those, like at an amusement park or something, and you get that like sepia tone photo of
The
you.
pioneers.
Yeah. You guys are in front of that wall tent and everything, holding
guy,
the baby.
Yeah, the guy was like, okay, now you're really serious face. A professional photographer who goes there and documents the whole
What a
thing.
photo, though. It's very cool, man. It's a very cool one. How many people did you say are involved in the Buffalo Bridge part?
15 to 20 people.
Oh, okay. It's not huge.
No.
Is it invite only or something like that?
Is sort of. The people who participate pay money,
Yeah.
and that buys all the food and the fuel and all
Okay.
the things that need to
But you're there
happen.
to work, obviously.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Everyone.
So
Everyone
that
is.
must be like a bit of a filter right there anyway for...
All you have
Yeah.
are pretty much nice people. But it's crazy because there were all these, there's elk roadkill everywhere there. They're like, oh, we're out of meat. Tom Elpel, who's a botanist and a primitive skills practitioner.
Not the author of the Cougar Conundrum.
No, a different, I believe.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
He did, botany in a day.
Oh, yeah.
That time.
Yeah.
He was there, and he's just mentioning one of the stories, like, oh, we're running out of meat. I think it was Tom was telling me the story. So they just went driving. It's like, oh, there's 6 roadkill elk.
Yeah.
We'll bring those back. So we did like a stone tool butcher one of the
Oh, neat,
days,
yeah.
and that kind of thing. So it's really awesome. I mean, most of the scraping was being done with buffalo femurs that had been cut at an angle, and
Yeah,
using those
really?
to remove
Wow.
the flesh.
So
and
this
stuff
is
on
a
the hide.
primitive skills group of people largely.
As well, yes.
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
that's really cool, man.
That's definitely one of the lenses
Yeah.
there. But yeah, you're camped on this little escarpment's the wrong word because it's just a steep gravel bank, but this rise over the Yellowstone River with all these beautiful mountains. There's bighorn sheep in the area.
Wow.
Everything. It's paradise. It's
Wow.
amazing. But
Oh, I'm glad you got to do that.
it was awesome. The indigenous folks that were there were sharing stories that their grandparents had told them about hunts, and the philosophy of like, no matter what's going on in your life, you have to put it away. You have to come here with gratitude and pure thoughts, because everything you do when you're preparing that animal to be food, you're putting into it and you're serving it out to everybody. If you're angry that day and pissed off and really grumpy, everyone's getting that energy. So everyone was just smiling the whole time.
Yeah. Wow. That's great, man. That's something encouraging about that. And it does sort of reflect back a little bit on what we were going to talk about today. So I'm interested in how this is going to tie in. But I also want to talk about hog bacon real quick, because I just got to feed you some.
That was the first time I'd ever had. I just didn't even.
Everyone always says you can't make it, but we got, when Tony Seachrist, he invited us down to Georgia to hunt. And it was, I want to say it was January. And it was one of those things where it was like, I don't have the time. And Grant and I were saying, I don't know. But Mark, our buddy Mark was like, he was really pushing us. And Tony was pushing us. And he kept saying, look, if you don't get down here now, they're going to burn through all this acorn fat. And they're going to be lean.
Right.
And we just were like, okay, let's just book it. So we went down. And one of the hogs was just right to make bacon. And And I mean, it's just straight up good maple bacon, right?
It's amazing.
Yeah,
it was amazing.
Really cool. So.
Yeah, you got like a panic text from me this year. I go, I really enjoy hunting these feral pigs, and typically they're abundant, and I really like the food, and everybody in my family enjoys the food. And I'm at this place, and there's pigs, and they're signed. They're everywhere. I can hear them, and I haven't gotten a single opportunity for a clear shot in 2 days. It's like just unheard of. Bow hunting. But it almost doesn't matter.
Okay.
They're so.
If you had a rifle, you'd have been in the
same thing. Yeah. And I'm like, what's going on? I mean, you heard me. Well, you heard me. You read in the text I sent you, like, Daniel, we're praying to these pigs. We're giving offerings. We put out a pig ancestor plate. And a lot of people just really disrespect this animal. It's like, it's causing environmental damage. That means I can gun it from a helicopter with a machine gun. It's like, it's just a full-on disrespect at the highest level that you can come to, because they're damaging the environment. Like, just don't look back at our own species. Right. And so I didn't know what to do. And it's like, I forget what you said, but I think you might have said something along the lines of, just give an honest prayer or something. I don't remember what it was.
No, I think I said to you when I was like, what would I need to hear right now? Because you were you're like, other people are getting them, and I
like, what's going on?
And I was like, you still have 2 days. Like, hunt hard. A lot can happen. Yeah. Like, stay focused, something like that.
So we go out that night into the night sky. We're in a small, it's a very small city, but I look up and I can see Orion. And I'm like, all right, Orion, I need assistance.
Yeah, you're the man.
Yeah, you're the hunter.
You're the most ancient hunter here.
Yeah, and the next night, like, wave after wave of pigs are coming in and offering all these wonderful, clear, broadside shots for bow hunting. So it's like, whatever happened, it changed.
Yeah. It's a weird thing with pigs because there's that negative connotation to them. One of the things that when I went hog hunting, same thing, I'm doing my ceremonies, and I'm asking, and I still am not fully clear on this. I'm getting closer. But I was like, what do you want me to call you? Hogs? Pigs? Boars? Like wild hogs? Like, all these names have, I like boar the most because the Eurasian boar is just called a boar, whether it's a male or a female. The species is called boar. But then these pigs are pigs too, right? They're mixed genetics with domestic hogs. But anyway, when you look at the history, because where are hogs domesticated? Not just by Europeans, but out in Indonesia, right? And in the Southeast Asia, and the Hawaiians had them, and the Polynesians had them. Like, pigs have been integral to human life all over the globe for a very long time. And then you look at people traveling around the world, bringing pigs, releasing them on islands, going, when people are seafaring a lot more, like, hey, we'll come back here and get these hogs later. Then you start to look at sort of I think why there's so many, sometimes people will say like, oh, what a cow, like a slur against a person. But you look at the amount of different ways of calling somebody a pig. Yeah. That's the one, right? Because I think we don't relate to ourselves as much to cows as we do to pigs. And then you start looking at the organ transplant abilities, stuff like that. It's like, this animal and us are very entwined. So when people start doing that thing of they're damaging the environment, therefore I can wage a war on them. It's like, do you just want to be violent to something?
That's what I'm getting at, Daniel. And as I understand, horses were here on this continent. They go extinct here, but then they're introduced back, and it's almost the same genetics. Right? And so, you hear people saying things like, well, we should consider them like native with an asterisk, right?
Yeah.
But the pig is almost the same.
Nice pronunciation on asterisk.
Asterisk. But the pigs are kind of the same.
Yep.
We've had pigs here, and then they go extinct, and then we bring them back. And instead of heralding these as these amazing animals like we do with the horses also can be very destructive depending on where they are, but for some reason they get all the glory and the pigs get all of the scapegoating.
It's the archetypes, man. You look at the archetypes. But also, I will say, because there's some people listening right now who are like, man, come to my yard.
And
have you seen what they do?
I understand.
I mean, you've seen it?
Oh, yeah.
You're like, did somebody come out here with heavy machinery? What happened to this landscape?
My response is always the same. The pigs didn't come here with an agenda. They were brought here by colonists.
Yeah.
And so if you want to blame somebody, blame the humans, if that's even valuable to do at all, because the pigs are doing the exact same thing we're doing.
Yeah.
They want to live.
That's it. And they're doing exactly what they do when we put a fence around them. They're just doing the same stuff, right?
Yes, right. I've watched them a lot while I was bow hunting, and I've come to really enjoy just watching their mannerisms and they're scratching here, and
they're obnoxious in the sense of so hunting them the first couple of days, and I had been once before and had a failed hunt. I had a shot but a failed hunt down there, and we were there a lot longer than we saw hogs. And same this time in that I'm there a couple of nights before I see them. So I'm trying to be all quiet. Anyway, when they finally came in, it was like people coming in beeping horns and partying. I mean, the noise they were making, it was like they wouldn't even hear me.
It's a ruckus.
They're not sneaking around. I like that. I respect that about them.
I find in the places that I've hunted them, the ones that come in the earliest, and I say earliest because I found that if I hunt in the later part of the afternoon, larger, at least 100-pound animals will come out, and that's kind of a nice 100 to 150 pounds is a nice, really a nice size for eating and us to butcher and get home. And the first ones that come out tend to be a little smaller, and there's barely any sampling of the air with the nose. And 30 minutes before legal light, now the animals are coming out. There's a lot more like, hey, what's going on? I can smell something. They might even go back into the forest there for a while.
Though.
But then at night it sounds like a lot of the guard is dropped.
Yeah.
And then
they're covered in darkness.
Here comes the parade.
I mean, they don't really have a lot to be afraid of. Look at the amount of neck muscle that they have wielding those tusks. I mean, the idea for me, the scariest idea is one trying to run between your legs, sloshing back and forth with its neck and cutting into your femoral arteries.
I can't even
as it goes
imagine.
By. Yeah. Do you carry a handgun or anything when you're in a tree?
I am in a tree stand.
I definitely had a handgun.
Yeah,
with me
but
too.
I kept it all bow and was just trying to be smart.
Cool. That's cool. I really am impressed by them as animals, and the food quality is awesome. And like that burger that I made today was 50% venison, 50% wild hog. And what I like about that, at least with the hogs that we had, is they're fatty. So cutting that into the same reason people cut pork into burger as it is.
Right.
But yeah, you look at how much pork people eat. Bacon is like, unless you have a religious prohibition, bacon's universally loved.
You're right.
Never have I seen it. To me, what's going on with bacon today, the way it's become like this health food since the paleo thing, it's very funny to watch.
Well, you've heard the poem, right?
I don't think so.
Oh, roses are red, violets are blue. I love bacon. Bacon.
Yeah, exactly. That kind of sums up the attitude towards bacon. But also sausage, right? Like go to any breakfast place in the world.
I mean, these are the savory breakfast foods that most everyone loves.
Cured meats too. Anything on a wooden plate that comes out to the table is going to be pork based. I mean, and then even insulin, right? Is insulin still taken from hogs?
Oh, I have no idea. I'm
not sure if modern day insulin is made from a hog pancreas, but I mean, it was.
Right.
Sure. Anyway, just this interesting relationship with this animal that, I like the idea that where they were getting kuru in Indonesia from eating other humans, that they were calling them long pig. Right? It says a lot. So this is just a fascinating animal. Anyway, I have a lot of respect for him, and I'll be curious to see how our hunts continue to unfold. But I did want to mention, too, I showed you a book a few minutes ago called Edible Forest Gardens. It's actually 2 volumes. It's kind of a permaculture manual that's based on the idea of mimicry of nature. And they're saying sort of like the complexity of nature is such that you could never know it. So mimic, so at least you'll do less damage and have better productivity. Largely it's based around understanding forest succession. So it's really about gardening. They don't mean forests in the actual canopied sense, but they mean understanding what your land wants to do in succession on its way back to forest.
Right.
And then how do you recreate succession, in self-pollinating, self-populating, perennial garden systems. But they have this whole section in there on invasive species, and they address it in a really thorough way that I hadn't seen before, because on this show, I've had this issue crop up multiple times, and on my last show, talking about invasives, and some people just, you know the arguments. Some people just can lose their mind when you say invasive species. And other people say it because to them it's just a biological term and it's just a way of talking about something, right? But anyway, they have some alternative language they're using, like opportunistic instead of invasive.
Oh, I see what
and
you're
it's
saying,
just
yes.
because they're like, we need to remove the agency sort of a little bit, like, so
The
it's not like,
connotation now, it's like this, it's triggering language.
right. I mean, and right now, any human to human social stuff is so touchy that you gotta be, you talk about plants, you gotta be really careful. But anyway, I've been using more and more exotic and opportunistic, because I think that they say the same thing without people getting so upset about it. It's like, no, I know hogs didn't build boats and come over here and start ripping up people's land. I'm not trying to say that.
Yes,
it's not their fault. I'm not blaming them. I know this is a people problem, but how else do I say it?
Yes, but at the same time, right.
Anyway, I think all this stuff we're talking about kind of paints us right around the edges of what we are here to talk about today.
We'll get back to the show in a moment, but first, have you ever thought about your light diet? We think about the food we eat and the water we drink, but what about the light we consume each day and especially at night? It's important because our light diet, or the light we consume through our eyes, is like a kind of electromagnetic nutrition, and it influences our circadian rhythm and hormone production. Our bodies need that crisp blue light of the early day to set our circadian rhythm. That's our body's internal clock, and that's why it's so good to head outside first thing in the morning to jumpstart your day. But our computers, tablets, phones, home lighting, and vehicle headlight LEDs also use blue light that tricks our bodies into thinking that night is day, upsetting our melatonin production, disrupting our sleep, and even impacting our all-important mitochondrial function. That's where Raw Optics comes in. Raw Optics produces the finest blue light blocking glasses to filter out the unhealthy, or rather untimely, light from your devices, helping to optimize your light diet and restore your circadian rhythm. Unlike the rest of the industry, Raw Optics are the only blue light blocking glasses that use melanin pigment infused lenses, not an external coating that can be rubbed off. They're streamlined and stylish, and they have daytime and nighttime designs. Don't be fooled by near clear glasses that claim to block blue light. They're a gimmick. Raw Optics are the real deal. If you work on a computer, spend a lot of time on your phone, or drive at night where bright blue LED headlights shine into your eyes, you need to check out Raw Optics. Go to rawoptics.com and use the coupon code WildFed for 15% off your order. Again, it's spelled RA Optics, and you'll get 15% off by using the coupon code WildFed. Now, back to the show.
A couple months ago, I had been reading The Cougar Conundrum, and it was talking about some research done on hunter attitudes and hunter knowledge in the United States, and I just got kind of fixated on that for a moment, brought it up to you, and said, hey, can we talk about this at some point? Because it's sort of something you and I we've been addressing it a lot together, but I don't think either of us understood it had been looked at like this.
Yeah, where lots of sampling had been done and attitudes characterized, and even the different groups, biological and ecological knowledge characterized, and essentially just looking at how they view the wildlife on this planet and how that might predict the way they're going to interact.
Yeah,
that's the part
with the landscape.
Yeah, that's the part that I'm the most interested in, because I'd obviously like to see a type of interaction where there is deep respect and deep gratitude, which is not to say that we're not supposed to hunt animals. Right.
And also, I think you and I are we're a small part of a movement that's happening right now to reframe. It's so weird. I always feel weird talking about this, because it's like standing in the face of something so much bigger and older than ourselves, hunting. Sometimes I feel like, how am I qualified to comment on hunting? And even if I'd been hunting since I was 2 years old, it's like, given the history of hunting in human beings, how am I even qualified to comment on it? No less think like, I'm going to try to affect how hunting's seen in the it's just I struggle with this part, but you and I are trying to contribute our own voices and our own energy to reshaping a narrative around it. I showed you a copy of Modern Huntsman a few minutes ago.
Yes.
What a beautiful publication. And, that's one of their sort of taglines is I think it's reshaping or reframing the narrative. And I really like that idea. So in that respect, this stuff we're talking about, why I guess we're talking about it is because we see that the narrative around hunting does need to be reframed. There's been a period over the last few decades where it's almost like somebody left the kids at home without a babysitter and they just got crazy in the world of hunting, and things got so like maybe the non-hunting world wasn't paying attention. But if you start to look at a lot of current, but especially the last couple decades worth of hunting media and publications and stuff, you'd be like, man, I hope nobody sees this. I mean, I'm with full respect to the people out there who have made the really good stuff and who've done the work. There's been some stuff out there that's a little shocking to see.
Yeah, and certainly, we talked about prior to doing this particular podcast of wanting to make sure that this is not meant to be divisive.
No way.
Right? This so often what happens is if you don't believe 100% what I believe, you're on the other team.
True believers.
Right? And I don't buy into that. I'm a hunter and I'm on hunting's team.
Yeah.
This is a biologically normal, evolutionarily normal behavior for humans to participate in.
Yep.
But that doesn't mean that we don't try to, I'm looking for a different phrase than police our membership, but we hold people accountable for what they're doing because what they do impacts how people perceive us.
Yeah.
Right? So, you can imagine if we belong to a political party and one of our members is out doing illegal things, I'm not against my political party by telling that person to get in line.
Right.
And that's what I'm trying to say here in a maybe sloppy way.
No, that's a good way to say it. There are behaviors, look, like sex is one of the most ancient things humans do too, but there are certain things that people will do that are criminally insane and
such a good way to
super destructive and very immoral. And if we saw that taking place, we'd have to intervene, and it wouldn't be because we're against sex.
But we're not saying stop having sex.
Yeah,
right.
It's like, but there are certain, because what we talked about before, there are people, it seems to me, it's kind of like this happens with lots of high-powered professions or violent professions. You get, let's say we're talking about special operations. In special operations, you've got some of the most upstanding human beings around, and it will attract a percentage of sociopaths who want to harm other people, and this is an outlet for it.
Mm-hmm.
And they have to
legal outlet.
Yeah, they have to deal with policing that in their own communities, right? And this happens with police, and this happens with politicians, and this happens with CEOs. Is there are humans out there who are sociopathic or sometimes worse, and I think they call that psychopathic. And they're looking for avenues to express it, and a lot of them find illegal ways to do it, and some find legal ways to do it, right? Okay, so similarly, if you're somebody who just wants to harm other creatures, like hunting is a world where you could find a way to do that. And then there are many of us who are on the other extreme. There are people who don't want to harm anything but will hunt because they see that this is how things feed themselves on the planet that we are from. And then there's some, I think I'm sort of in the middle. I'm sort of fascinated by killing, but I also don't want to glorify it. But I do find the act is it's ancient, and it's very interesting how we find it. We struggle with it.
I'm in an altered state when it's happening.
Yeah.
There's just no. I'm just going to frame it like that.
Yeah. I was talking to somebody the other day. We were talking about trigger weights, and people like to adjust for that light trigger pull, and I go like, dude, when's the last time you remember your trigger when you shot anything? Because in that moment you are not thinking about your trigger finger. You're just, man,
that was about 3.5 pounds.
Yeah, I think
wasn't it?
Gee, that fella went off at 3.25. You look at any hunting media where it's video and you see people shoot, and you can see in that moment you just go somewhere else. It's like so I find all that fascinating. I'm not put off by killing, but I certainly would never want to glorify killing. So yeah, the gunning hogs from a helicopter thing, it's interesting when there's this tribal warfare attitude taken against an animal. It's I find all that the kind of thing that we probably don't want the undecided non-hunting public to see. Because, like,
I don't want it to be seen by anyone. I don't want it to exist.
I don't want it to be seen by me.
Yeah,
but I'm saying, like, we need
saying.
to police our own community in that sense, because it's like, man, I feel I don't want somebody who runs some helicopter hog hunting operation and be all mad at me here, but it's like, it's hard for me to get my head around that kind of hunting. And I say the undecided hunting public because if you're already against hunting, I've found it almost doesn't matter how you try to, I mean, they just don't care. You were describing the other day people who want to stop this buffalo hunt by indigenous people who have treaty rights to it.
There's an animal rights group. We don't have to go into who they are, but they want to stop all buffalo hunting, and that includes the indigenous who have hunted buffalo on this continent for,
14,000 years.
At least, right? A really long time. And that's just like, to me, that's that ultimate, I'll use the social justice term, colonial worldview. I want you to do exactly as I believe. And if you don't do as I believe, then I think you're a bad person.
Right. Okay, so that's what that's the thing. I don't want to be doing that, but at the same time, I feel that if we don't sanctify the hunt, we run the risk of getting into some really weird territory.
I just find, and if this is the proper jumping off point, maybe I have hundreds of these kinds of anecdotes, but here's one. I come out of the North Maine woods and stop in at this location where they've got Wi-Fi, and they clearly have this satellite TV, this big screen TV going, and they're catering to a hunting group of people, and there's a duck hunting show going on. Bunch of waterfowl have come in. These were Canada geese, as I recall, and the hunters pop up out of a blind and shoot, and they're successful. They drop a lot of birds onto the ground. And then you look over, and there's obviously, as often happens with flying animals, the marksmanship is really difficult, and you've got crippled birds who are flopping around. They pan back to the hunters, who are slow motion laughing. We've been successful. It's going to be a great night. And there's birds flopping around, and there's a retriever going over to grab some of them. No one's moving.
Yeah.
They know the birds can't fly off, and the water body they'd come into is so tiny they can access all these. And there's no thought of those birds are experiencing fear and pain, as any hunted animal would. And I don't need that to go on longer. I'm going to celebrate.
Yeah.
As opposed to first dispatch the animal, end the physical suffering, offer gratitude, and then there is a time for celebration. I do celebrate, but it comes later. The slow motion laugh, and it was
part
so
of this is
hard
the
for
editing
me.
of this too, right? That's the other interesting part, because we don't know what actually happened. We only know how it was edited together. I'm very aware of how this all works now.
Right.
And that, to me, what's weird there, because I'm mixed on this. If you and I were hunting a bear or deer or moose, something like that, it's a bit more of that solemnity in the moment. But what about when we're fishing and we're catching smelts? And just they're coming out.
They're coming in.
And we are laughing and we're celebrating, and they're going into the bucket, and some of them don't die right away. You think they did, but then you hear them kicking around, or we're catching bigger fish, pollock and haddock offshore, and they're going into the fish box, and it's hard to take time with each animal because of the pace.
And that I totally understand and agree with some of these.
Now, hang on. I just want to add, let me complete it. If we were making a show about that, I would not edit it in such a way to make it seem like we were partying about the crippling of the animal. That part's where it gets a little bit, because even whatever happened in the moment for those hunters, they could have, how they're portraying it, knowing it's going to be pumped out into bar rooms.
It was just the portrayal of it to me was just you're doing things in the wrong order to me. And one I might have shared with you before is this traditional bow hunter who shoots a tom spring turkey hunting out of his blind. And that's an amazing feat. I have so much respect for this guy's archery abilities. And he shoots this tom, and it dies relatively quickly, but he gets there before it's dead. And he picks it up, and the bird is flapping, and he starts dry humping it.
Oh, man.
As a sign of domination.
Dominance. Yeah, it's dominance, right?
That's dominance.
Yeah.
And it's like you're hunting, in my opinion, for all of the wrong reasons. You're the person that is hunting to dominionistically hunt other animals to combat essentially Mother Nature and show your human dominion over it.
One thing
It's such a hard thing for me to watch.
I got one more piece here to just play devil's advocate again, because I'm on the same page as you, but all this stuff's popping up in my head. When I'm hunting, I get definitely, I mean, I haven't ever had my blood work done, but I get surges of testosterone and for sure decreases in cortisol. And
definitely,
there's been times in my life, you've seen me at times in my life where that's happened to me outside of the hunting context, where my behavior makes me understand maybe some of what we call like roid rage. Not necessarily the rage part, but the behavior that'll happen in high testosterone circumstances.
Yep.
Because you start to feel dominant when your T levels are high. Have you seen any of this research? Like when, I don't know if this was macaques maybe or something, but they were looking at the blood profiles, testosterone to cortisol ratios when a new animal becomes like alpha in the group. And immediately what happens is his T levels rocket up and his cortisol levels go down. And all the other animals have low T, high cortisol.
Right.
And then some work's been done looking at T levels when people go to job interviews, and ways like in the interview when you're waiting, like body postures you can do that actually increase your T and decrease your cortisol. So I think sometimes like you shoot and then you just feel like, I'm insane. No one can stop me. And then you might be liable to, I mean, not always, a lot of times, especially if you're alone, you act normally pretty solid.
This is my thing, you know. I do most of my hunting alone, and then it's nothing but, you know, respect for this animal, words spoken, different rituals that I do. But there are times, depending on who the group of people, what that group of people is composed of, I'm like, I don't know, this isn't right for some of these people. I don't know what they're going to think. And I want to do this, but I'm gonna make it a little shorter this time, kind of stuff.
I've made it a habit to sneak off. Even from my good friends, like on that hog hunt, like I wasn't like, hey, does anybody want to go do the ceremony with me? I just kind of went and did my own thing, because also I find that kind of ceremony and prayer, I've been around enough, like ayahuasca and mushrooms and all the kind of things. I've been around enough of those to see that can also become hubris, where people start to do these elaborate ceremonies that are like pomp, you know, and circumstance, all of that. And I don't want it to be where it's not, I'm not doing it for the right reasons, and now I'm just trying to show off how good my praying is or some stupid thing like that. So, you know, go off on my own a lot, but I have felt two things. One, I feel how I want to approach this animal right now gets modulated by who's with me, because I'm afraid I'm going to look like I'm going too far into like the woo-woo stuff for them. And then I've also had it where I'm really excited, and then I think, whoa, I hope I don't like go too far here, and then people think I'm calloused about this. But I'm actually excited, you know? So I guess all that for me is to preface that, I mean, I'm not here to like judge as much as think, how do we need to present this in the future for it to continue to be a thing? Because I've had conversations with a few people lately on this show where I've been like, can you imagine, you know, go back 200 years and try to tell anybody that hunting itself could be in jeopardy of existing in any legal way in the world? Like, that just seems preposterous.
And of course, as we've been talking about, it's declining.
Yeah.
Right? It's COVID aside, and I have not seen the numbers, but we're at somewhere around 4% of the population. And we don't have to go back too far. I forget the date. What is it? 1975, it was 8% of Americans. And so you think
in
about
our lifetime, basically, it's halved.
And that's in millions of participants that it's dropped.
Right.
And of course, there's all kinds of ramifications.
I wonder if there's
this.
dilution. What was the population of the United States in 1975? Is this a pure calculation, or is it diluted by the new number? Yeah, it must be, because we were probably half the population in 1975.
Yeah, and this was a percentage of the population. Right.
Yeah, so that's part of it, is that less people are participating, and part of it's dilution by newborn non-hunters.
And obviously hunting has some really important ramifications that people wouldn't necessarily think about, going beyond conservation dollars. There are some species whose monies for management, for scientific studies, come from the sale of hunting licenses and hunting equipment and so on. That's really important. There is the management of populations, though I do think that's often overstated.
Yeah, way overstated.
And that's because of this...
ignorantly overstated by people who don't really understand the issue that much, I found.
Yeah, the compensatory versus additive mortality that's going on that, we should definitely mention here. But, there's other things too, and one of them that I don't think everyone thinks about is hunters tend to have a better knowledge of the biology and ecology of their terrain. In other words, just an understanding of the animals, have a better understanding than the general public.
Yep.
In fact, as we were talking about, anti-hunters tend to score the lowest.
Yeah. Do you want to lay this out, this whole framework, so that it's clear right from the beginning, sort of this study and how it was, what it looked at, so we have all the moving parts of it before we talk about it?
Yeah. And the whole study definitely breaks people's attitudes toward wildlife down into a whole list of categories, which goes much finer than we need to go. Yeah. And
we'll go low resolution on it.
Yeah, and also just talks about race and gender and age and just, religious context and so on and so forth. Was there a hunter in the home when they were growing up, and all of this kind of stuff? But Keller did this study in the 1970s, and then there was an update to it in 1984, and it's kind of the basis for what a lot of people look at when they're looking at hunter attitudes. And while he had these a whole group of categories that were, the sportsman category, the dominionistic category, the ecological category, the scientific category. In other words, how do people mostly interact or view animals? A utilitarian meat hunter, a trophy hunter, all of these different categories that can be teased out of it. But a later sort of person came along and put them into three general broad categories that I really liked. There's the dominionistic sport hunter. They're kind of there to dominate, to show their prowess over nature.
They'll often phrase that differently. Participants in that world usually say, I'm there to challenge myself, to see what I'm made of, to see what I'm capable of.
Right.
And they view nature and the hunt as a backdrop.
It's a testing ground
to test themselves.
Right.
Yeah.
And obviously,
because they wouldn't go like, no, I'm here to show my dominance.
Yeah. The trophy hunter is within that group. Then there's another big category that groups together the utilitarian, the meat hunter. They're there primarily to put food on the table. It isn't necessarily about anything else. It's to put food on the table.
That category I find most akin to farmers.
Yes.
That's kind of how I view it.
And they tend to view wild animals in that same kind of general
utilitarian
way as the farm animals.
A lot of your like classic old school rancher who sort of, we shoot the coyotes and we encourage these grasses for the cows. Just all like everything is just like Lego pieces in a way. Yes. But also, again, being very broad here, because farmers, there's a lot of kinds of farmers.
That's
but
right.
that classic larger scale farm, large family farm type farmer is how I kind of think of the utilitarian hunter.
Right. And then the last of the three broad categories that were maybe of interest to us, because we are talking about hunters, not those who have negative feelings toward
which
animals.
Which are categorized as well.
Yeah, is the naturalistic. The people who actually want to be an integral part of their landscape and function as an omnivorous organism, who want to understand in a deep way, kind of also drawing on the ecological perspective a little bit, what all those connections are and what it feels like to be part of that.
Yep.
And so those are the three categories that I'm kind of most interested in understanding because they group most of the hunters fall into one of those three. When we get into the anti-hunters or the people who are just, I'm kind of neutral, there's a whole slew of other categories. But those three, I think, are the ones that we can focus on the most.
You know, it reminds me a little bit of, just to kind of get our heads around a little bit who these characters archetypically are. You have this too in outdoorsmanship or whatever, outdoor personship, where you have like, let's say the like military style survivalist, right? You have the bushcraft person and you have the primitive skills person.
Yeah,
it's
you
very
can break
similar.
them down into different categories.
Yeah, because I'd say a lot of the military style survivalists are very dominionistic. They're like, go out in nature and conquer. And then you've got the bushcrafters who are more like
done and get it done efficiently.
Very utilitarian about that approach. And then you have in the primitive skills world, it's much more desire to integrate into the landscape, like literally like mud on your face, kind of like camouflage, getting down, willing to handicap on something just to do it in an ecologically sound way.
Yes.
So yeah, it's interesting. I'm sure that you could find these categories in lots of places. I haven't really thought about it before today, but I'm sure we could find it in everything, or lots of things. But anyway, and then you were just saying about the anti-hunter or the...
Yeah, and so once we step out of those categories, obviously there's all kinds of categories where people may not be hunting, but may look at animals from a moral perspective and seeing them as having human-like traits and human-like rights, which I don't necessarily dispute. So there's a whole array of other categories. But it's also interesting to me when you look at, if you were to quiz people on their knowledge of natural history, typically it's the naturalistic category that holds the highest level of knowledge about animals. Like we were talking about, if you don't interact with the animals for particularly as like anti-hunters, or you're only interacting with them just to shoot them and that's the end of it, you don't have necessarily the breadth of knowledge if you were following those animals' tracks throughout the year to find out everything you can about them. Where do they go at night?
Yeah.
What are they eating right now? Why are they walking by this spot day after day? What is it about this location? Those are the things that help you not just become an effective hunter, but actually begin to feel like you're part of that landscape.
Yep.
You're one of those predators that has woven itself into that ecological fabric. So you begin to understand the habits of those animals even outside of the hunting season.
When you and I first met, I was, kind of in these like new age communities a lot more than I am today. And these, some medicine culture, the nutrition, that whole world I was in. And that whole biohacky kind of world, there's a lot of people aren't connected to place. I'm trying to think of how to say this. There's this attitude of like, you could kind of go anywhere and start again wherever you want. And so I was like kind of into that, a lot of traveling and stuff. And I wasn't really connected to place, even though I had grown up mostly in New England. It's really interesting to me now that I've lived in this home for 6 years. Little things will come up like before. So, okay, why I'm saying this is before, the things that I knew about animals or plants were mostly memorized.
Oh, right.
They were like facts that I knew.
Right.
But now being here for a while, there's things that you just eventually see. Like the other day we watched, I think they were buffleheads out here. And it was two drakes chasing this hen, and we just happened to catch this courtship that was taking place.
Nice.
And watched my dog run up and spook him off. It kept looking like she was going to try to fly away, but she wasn't really flying away. She was being coy until there was a dog, and she really flew away, and they flew away, but the Canada geese stayed. And we're sort of watching that, and you start to see these behaviors. Now, year after year, they add up, and what I notice is when I walk my land with people, I'm constantly, people will be like, ask about something, or I'll point something out, and I hear myself saying something that I'm like, oh, that couldn't have known that except from experience.
Yes.
And so
that's traditional ecological knowledge.
Right. Yeah.
The indigenous who lived here or there or wherever simply had many lifetimes of it accumulated into it.
And some of it's passed on and some of
That's right.
But you also see a lot. So,
right.
So my point is, like, over the time that I've hunted, I have gained all of this knowledge that I don't think there's any way to shortcut or get. You just have to be out there doing.
Right.
And so because I'm interested in the animals that I hunt, like you said, you learn the food that they eat. You learn the kind of structures that they build to live in. You know when they have their young and what their courtship is like. And before you know it, you actually learn about dozens of species, not just the species you're after, right? So that's that.
And you start, the part that I love the most, as time goes on, the noun, still important. The noun is what we eat, but the verb, the connections become important, and your connection to that animal becomes so important. And you can't get that from watching YouTube videos while you're, under quarantine for COVID. Sorry. Like that stuff has to come from lived experiences. But, continuing on this trend of just the idea, Keller published a few quotes that I think would be really useful here. And it starts out with: the American public as a whole was characterized by extremely limited knowledge of animals. And he gives a few examples.
This is based on testing them.
Yes. Only 26% of the tested people knew that a manatee is not an insect.
Wow.
Only 24% answered the statement, timber wolves, bald eagles, and coyotes are all endangered.
Wow.
Only 13% of the American public knew that raptors are not small rodents.
Wow. What percent?
13.
Whoa.
Okay, and I'll give two more here. About one half incorrectly answered the statement, spiders have 10 legs.
Whoa, okay. You know what's funny is right before you said that one, I was thinking to myself, it's not because people are stupid, it's because people are focused on other things, right? Like they might not.
That is true.
They might not know what a raptor is, but they know like the names of sports players, or they know.
Or watch this person code in a particular computer language.
They might be capable of running a Fortune 500 company. But then when you said, so I was like, a lot of this knowledge you only know if you're into this stuff. And in the past, you had to be into this stuff, and now you don't. But then when you said the thing about spiders, you lost me. I'm like, there's some stupid people.
The last one, just 57% indicated the correct answer to the question, most insects have backbones.
Oh, no. Wow.
So...
Wow.
But this is important. This is important because
this is a little vertebra.
The non-hunting public who performed the lowest on these scores are also voting on hunting policy.
Yep.
This is like people who know nothing about firearms wanting to be part of what the safety...
How we regulate the firearms.
And you need to know something.
If for people who don't know, you end up with some very funny cosmetic laws on guns where you do not affect the killing power of these weapons. You just affect the clothes that they wear. It's very silly. Like sometimes in gun culture, it's like you just slap your forehead at some of the...
Yes.
Because you're like, oh, this person does not know
anything,
what the weapon is or how it works or how many rounds it can fire, all that. But this is way more than that. Right? This is like the planet that you're from.
This is a fundamental disconnection from the planet you live on.
Right, because firearms are a relatively new human, machination.
But wildlife?
Yeah, but like spiders have had 8 legs as long as there's been people, right? So it's, wow, that's pretty crazy. So he's studying this, right? He's testing people. He's figuring out what group they're in, and he's testing them with the same questions, and he's seeing, hey, the naturalistic hunter knows this much, and obviously it's a standardized test, right?
Yes.
Okay.
And just to me, there's a lot more to this, and we could just keep going into all of these different things that came out of all the results that came out of these studies. And there's been other ones that have been done using that system, taking Kellert's categories of how people interact or refer to the wild world, and then testing college students specifically to see what is it that they identify as, and what about their background influences the way that they view hunting. So there's been some other ones that have been done as well, but they often go back to this particular study that was done by this person named Keller. And one of the things that I found really interesting at the end, and I actually brought this graph because I wanted to be able to show it to you. And it was looking at the question of the following reasons for hunting. Which do you approve or oppose? And what I did really like is that true subsistence hunting by hunter-gatherers was not universal, but was one of the strongest categories of approved by the American public.
Yeah.
It's the only one where you get 82% approve of subsistence hunting if that is your only choice, essentially.
Yeah.
Right? But you'll notice, and one of the things that struck me is hunting game animals for recreation and sport, in other words, not for meat, just for trophy. And 62% of the American public disapprove of hunting solely on those reasons.
Yeah.
But hunting for meat, that was the other big category where you get all this approval, 85%.
Yeah, just can I reframe that, because you jumped over to disapproval from approval. So traditional native hunting gets a 82% approval rate.
From the American public, that's right.
Okay. Hunting for recreation or sport only gets 37%.
Approval, right.
But hunting for meat is the highest, 85%.
So it comes back to that. It's essentially the same as the subsistence hunting. Everyone is saying, if you are using the animal, or at least you have the intent to use the animal, there's things that happen that we sometimes can't. But if you intend to use that animal, even if just for meat, you're not going to use the bones and you're not going to take the hide, just eating it, there's this huge amount of approval that this is an acceptable reason for hunting. But hunting just for recreation alone, you're just shooting things.
37%. I almost think it'd be lower today. And this is old. I mean, this is interesting here. Hunting for trophy is down at 18% approval. I mean, that makes sense to me. I'm not surprised by that. I think that there'd be even less approval for that today. I mean,
and because again, this was the update.
What would you guess if you just had to guess what a hunting for trophy approval rate?
I think it would be single digits now.
Yeah, because you got 4% hunter participation, and of that 4%, not everybody agrees with trophy hunting who are hunters.
That's right.
But then, you've got their family members might pad these numbers a little bit, whatever. But yeah, I think it would be single digits too. I'm almost surprised that hunting for meat gets a higher approval rate than hunting by native cultures.
Well, it's a few percent higher.
Again, I think that might be. I wonder if that would be different today, because veganism wasn't as widespread back then.
Yeah.
You didn't have like forks over knives type documentaries and all of that, and you didn't have all the social justice politics too. I think a lot of people would say, I approve of this hunting by native cultures, even if they didn't approve it, just because they'd be afraid to say.
Hunting.
Yeah, they'd be afraid to say one way or the other, so they'd just say they agree. How does it? I want to talk about the attitudes against hunting as well, and especially the ecological knowledge. That part was really interesting to me, because if you find how people score, you see how they almost match up in society. I'll explain that in a second. But
and I focused a lot less on that particular part, because
the part that stands out to me was that. Oh, go ahead.
No, please.
Well, the part that stood out to me looking it over was, and this is the kind of thing, like, I wish they'd write a pop culture book about it. I was like, Arthur, can you read this? Studies. The part that the anti-hunter knowledge, ecological knowledge, was about on par with the trophy hunter, right? Is that how that broke down? Or the dominionistic hunter. The person who's hunting to essentially exploit nature, the person who hunts to use nature to prove themselves and to demonstrate dominion, knows about as much about wildlife and nature and natural history as the vehement anti-hunter.
Yeah, they were actually not that far away from each other.
Right?
Yes.
So that's interesting to me, because if I remember, it also said that the backpacker and the the backpacker and the utilitarian hunter knew about the same amount. So the person, the outdoor recreator who's a non-hunter, knows about as much natural history as the utilitarian hunter did. And then I believe it was the naturalistic hunter and the ecologist.
And often the ecologist being those that have graduate degrees, were on average a comparable amount of knowledge.
Which is not to say that there wouldn't be things that the ecologist would know. These are standardized tests, right? So that's how they're scoring on these tests. And some of those questions are not that difficult.
That's right. That's right.
But here's what I find interesting about it. When you look at culture today, I don't find that naturalistic hunters are having arguments with anti-hunters very much. Who I see arguing with each other is the anti-hunter and the dominionistic hunter, just battling it out online, you know, both just nasty with each other.
Right.
Whereas those of us who are naturalistic hunters, like, we're busy doing the naturalistic stuff. Like, I'm too busy doing that stuff to be in this argument. Hunting isn't something I do every November when it comes around. I mean, I'm out there doing a lot.
I'm already scouting for turkeys. You know, I just like it that much.
Exactly.
I love seeing these animals.
And it's like, what are they doing right now, right before the hunt starts, right?
Yeah.
That's the thing. So anyway, I think we could kind of pare these people down, and you sort of see that who are the naturalistic hunters hanging out with? Like, I'm always interviewing ecologists and wildlife managers and stuff. Those are the people that can have the conversations I want to have, you know, and who can fill in the gaps for me and stuff. So we're drawn to each other.
A little bit less of the mythology that exists in every field that you go to, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, I was learning recently about the nature faker movement that happened about 100 years ago, when there was right when the modern conservation era took over, there were people writing books that were just making stuff up about what they had. One of them that was brought up on this show was somebody claiming to watch woodcock with a broken leg use mud to make a cast and build a cast for itself so that it could recover from the broken leg. But this kind of stuff was being published as natural history. And there ended up being this movement to bring in, you know, like real ecological knowledge. And I think Teddy Roosevelt was one of the people who was really opposed to this nature faker movement and wanted the American public to know real natural history.
Right.
So anyway, it's kind of funny to me because there is a lot of mythology out there.
And one of the myths that we really need to address is this idea that, well, if you love animals so much, when you kill the animal, you depress their populations.
Man, this is important.
Right? Because, well, there were, let's say, 5,000 of these animals, and you just killed one. Now there's 4,999. There's one less. And if I kill one and several other people, it just goes down, and that's the end of it. It's simple math. And it's like every topic that gets oversimplified, it's wrong. And what people need to understand is the difference between compensatory mortality and additive mortality.
Let's pause there, and I want to give an analogy. I've never heard anyone say, I'm really worried about the human population because of war and murder. War and murder, obviously the population of humans is just going to drop to extinction. Everybody understands that we make so many humans every year that the amount we make compensates over and above the loss of life, even though there's all this loss of life to conflict and violence in the world.
So if we were in the town that's near to your house and somebody gets shot and they die, that's compensatory mortality. Now, it doesn't mean that that exact individual was going to die this year, but what it means is a certain number of humans in this town were going to die of some cause. And that was one of them this year. It could have been accidents. And of course, we don't get some of the factors like starvation and disease that can happen to wildlife populations, although here we are in a pandemic, so now we have that particular scenario playing out. Sorry, I won't tell you what's happening in the background. But compensatory mortality is just saying that every year, let's say we were to take a deer population, we can expect a certain number of individuals are going to die from an accumulation of causes, which do include accidental deaths, potentially drownings and, other collisions with cars, predation, disease, starvation, and so on. And the ones that we shoot don't add on top of that necessarily. In fact, if we were to shoot a few deer from near your house, now there's more food for the other deer, and then those does, the female deer, are in better health and have larger litter sizes, essentially. They have more fawns, and they build the population back up. So we really need to start looking at populations not on a minute-by-minute basis, but on a year, a circle of the seasons basis to actually understand what's going on.
For some species, multiple year cycles, but...
Yes. Yeah, and of course, But one of the interesting things that's happened with, say, coyotes, because everyone thought what they were doing, they were shooting coyotes, they're doing additive mortality, which means there's going to be more deaths over and above all of the other causes when we start shooting coyotes. And there's a program that's put out where we're going to give you a certain amount of
bounty.
Yeah, the bounty, right? This bonus money for everyone you shoot. And 1 year in this particular place, 3,000 coyotes are brought in this particular state, and they hand out all the money. And year 2, 3,000 coyotes approximately are shot, and they hand out all the money. Year 3, 3,000 coyotes go, and they're like, oh, wait a second, this is
compensatory mortality.
This is a sustainable take of coyotes in this particular state. This is compensatory mortality. The hunting is actually doing nothing.
Yeah, it's not additive. You want it in this case. When you're managing for more animals, you want compensatory. When you want to get rid of animals, you want additive mortality, and this was not additive.
Additive mortality is really hard to get to. It requires, in some cases, serious hunting pressure.
Yeah.
Like the feral pigs in Florida where I go hunting. It's compensatory.
You're never going to...
By hunting alone, you're never going to get rid of the pigs unless you had 50% of the population. I don't know what the actual figure would be, but if you had that level of hunter participation, now you could do something.
Yeah. I think we could I got 3 things I want to say. Let's see if I can remember them all. Okay, the first one is we can make it really simple by being like, if there's 100 animals and every year they have 50 babies, if we didn't kill any, they'd have 150, but 50 die every year, so it always goes back down to 100, and now you allow 25 to be killed by hunters, and then the other 25 still die too. You're always getting back to this number. And actually in Maine, like with our black bears, even though we kill 3,000 to 4,000 of them, the population continues to grow. We're not even touching the compensatory mortality.
That's right.
Managers are thinking, hey, let's add another tag because, I know, right? Hopefully. Add another tag because we actually have too many on the landscape for what our public here, our public who loves bears but doesn't love bears in their yards and in their houses and stuff.
That cultural carrying capacity.
Social carrying capacity.
Yeah.
The other thing I wanted to say is it seems to me one of the key words for people to understand is fecundity.
Yes.
Because
that's part of this.
You look at some animals, it's like that animal is going to produce 100,000 eggs because 3 of her young are going to make it. Right? Other animals may be lower fecundity, like a doe is going to probably produce 2 fawns a year. And then you get some animals like elephants, right? Now the cycle's, I don't remember years though. Stretched out.
Yeah.
So the lower the fecundity, the less you can take.
Right.
Without starting to dip into additive mortality.
Especially with those longer lived animals.
But if people are wondering why can we harvest so many fish, it's because fish have such a high fecundity. If we try to do to the land, and we did try to do to the land, what we do to the sea, and again, and with all love to all the commercial fishermen out there and all the commercial fishermen I know and care about and how much I love their ecological knowledge and the things that they do for us, at some point we're going to have to address commercial fishing the way we addressed the market hunt, right? Because, it can only go so far. Our equipment's getting too good, our sonar's too good, all that kind of stuff. Our nets are too good. But before that, like we couldn't really touch we couldn't touch the additive mortality. We couldn't create additive mortality in fish. Their numbers are just too high.
Right.
The last thing is a reference from Idiocracy, one of my favorite films, and I'm so glad you saw it recently. I love when he's in jail. For folks who haven't seen it, go see it immediately. Or sorry, you'll have to stream it or something. You're
living it.
Yeah, you're living it. This movie was made, 15 years ago or something.
You might as well go watch the documentary.
You're living in it now. Yeah, exactly. Predictive documentary. He's the most average man in the world, asleep for 500 years, wakes up in this future 500 years later, and now he's the smartest man on the earth. And there's that part where he's in jail, and they're doing like an aptitude test for him. They're like, sir, this next test is to see what your aptitude's good at, so you could be a particular individual in jail, right? That part. So he's doing that test, and the test is, of course, it's like read to them instead of written, right?
Yeah.
Which, Avani, that's what they do with a lot of the kids in the public schools now, is their tests are all verbals.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, they're moving towards a lot of that. But anyway, there's that part where they're like, if you have one bucket that holds 3 gallons and another bucket that holds 5 gallons, how many buckets do you have? And he's like, 2? That's such
trying
a good scene.
Trying to figure out, like, where's the trick? Like,
Am I being tricked here? Is this the real question? But I think the additive mortality thing's like that. Once you get it, you're like, oh, 2 buckets. Like, this is really simple stuff. The whole thing that the wildlife managers are doing is just keeping us inside that compensatory mortality.
That's their job.
And if they start, and one of the ways that they know is, like you mentioned before, is how many animals come in. They get their population estimate. Then they go like, okay, out of this population, we think we can take this many. And then if we start taking more than that, right, that's like, oh, red flag. We'll back off the tags. We'll back off the season or whatever it is to keep it in the compensatory zone. So another way to simplify it would be what Hal Blood said to me recently. I was telling you earlier today. He said he's a kind of a famous deer hunter here in Maine. And he said, these antis think if you didn't kill the animal, it'd just live forever. And as crazy as that sounds, that is what it seems like to me a lot of times. Like, people think like, oh, that animal just wasn't going to die. And I don't know if they anthropomorphize and they imagine our lifespan on every animal. So maybe they think, oh, that, deer would have lived to be 70.
Look, we're not all lake whitefish.
Yeah,
okay?
Exactly.
With these 50-year lives.
Yeah, exactly. Or like redfish, or turtles.
The wild turkey, one of the most heavily hunted by humans and non-humans.
Yeah, everything hunts them.
I don't think I've ever, the ones that I've had aged, because I have shot some that were banded, nothing's been out of 2 years old yet.
A 3-year-old turkey is a
my
good
understanding,
tom,
that's like a big old tom now.
Yeah, the big long spurs and stuff,
Yeah.
That's an old turkey. And that said, like, everything on the landscape wants to eat turkey or turkey eggs.
Yes.
And when I went out with Kelsey Sullivan, our up and game bird biologist for the day one day, he brought me to a late season nest when he was explaining, this hen has set up this nest because her other clutch got eaten.
Right.
And they just have a backup plan for that. So their fecundity is built around the idea that we need to produce this many offspring. And interestingly, here in Maine, there's some, I don't know how solid all of the science is on this, but they did bump us up from, what was it before? It was 4 animals a year, and now we're at 8.
Yeah.
Right?
Statewide, maybe not within your wildlife management district, but if you can move to other districts, you can potentially kill 8
animals total. The population can sustain it. Now, I want to add one thing to this conversation. Again, devil's advocate.
Mm-hmm.
There's this thing, it's not just in wildlife management, but it's also in forestry and all these other industries too, is there's a tendency to look at maximum sustainable take.
Mm-hmm.
I think that is one of the things that we have to be honest about in this conversation, because I think sometimes you don't want to manage for maximum sustainable take. You want to manage for what's best for that population as well. So sometimes I don't want to make it sound like I'm naive and think that this can never be exploited, and that as long as we stay in compensatory mortality, there's never going to be a problem, because we have to think about age structure. We have to think about population density and distribution. There's a lot more
land use practices and so on.
Yeah, a lot of variables there. But I think that point is important, because humans are taking animals that we're going to essentially, at a population level, we're going to die that year.
Yeah, again, not that necessarily that individual,
right.
But at the population level, yes.
Which is really the only useful way to think about managing wildlife, really. I mean, we're not managing each individual animal as
a... But this is what we see, and we see this particularly with social justice. But this is something that I've observed.
It's like impossible to talk about anything now without coming back around to social justice stuff.
We went from a focus on the collective, whether that was the landscape, whether that was the village, and we have become hyper-focused on the individual. And we do that within our own context here. Instead of focusing on the collective of humans, we're often focused only on the individual victims within it, and not necessarily how this all plays out.
It's funny because those same people always accuse you of too much ego. It's like, no, you're the one who's breaking everyone down into individuals. That's what ego is, man. Like,
but we do that with animals now.
Yeah.
We treat the animals, the wild animals, exactly as we would examine humans. And you need to look at things as a collective on the population level. I just want to, well, I guess what I'm trying to say is I'm hopeful that the next person who writes to me and says, if you love this animal so much, why would you kill it? Well, I want you to remember, this is often in reference to black bear. I want you to remember that when I consume that animal, that I'm doing the absolute most sacred act that I can possibly do. I mean, it goes way beyond sex, and you're like, wait, what?
Yeah, my wife wants me to start saying, giving a caveat that she doesn't fully agree with this. But anyway, go ahead.
Yeah. But if you think about it, even in sex, you're in an orifice of a person, right? But you are not actually
You're
in
two
the cells.
separate bodies.
And
you step away from each other after.
When I consume that black bear, it actually goes through those membranes into my body. And not only do I become more black bear, it provides the building blocks of my body, but the black bear becomes more human. It's transforming into my being. Yeah. We are literally joining spiritually, physically, every way that you can think about it. It's the most sacred.
Down to the ionic level, and
it's
the
the
atomic
most
level.
sacred thing that we do.
Right.
And I'm sorry if some people might not like the sexual reference, but
I use it all the time. Ever since I got that from you, I steal that. I use that all the time. No, I agree. I agree and at least understand the meaning of it.
And so this is one of the ways that I most honor the animal, not by knowing nothing about it and yelling at people who do, the anti-hunter, but by actually interacting with the animal in a way that Homo sapiens always have. Reverence, definitely a little fear in there. Where have bears played a part? For example, in our depictions of both primitive and modern people interacting with these, very potentially terrifying animals,
very powerful animals,
but also one of probably the most beautiful organism on our landscape. Yeah. And that's because you disagree with it doesn't make it wrong.
They call this has been looked at obviously a lot, and they call it the hunter's paradox, right? That's the name of this particular philosophical question. How can you claim to love something that you kill?
Because I'm focused on the population and not the individual.
To me, I don't find this to be difficult to solve, but I do present the sort of anti-hunter's paradox, which is like, how do you protect something that you don't know anything about? If no one knows about these things anymore because we just leave them alone, how will we protect them? Because there is a tidal wave of development underway. There is nonstop land development taking place. I mean, these animals are running out of places to live.
Right.
And
we're telling them to move over and move on every day, including the anti-hunter.
And it's not happening in a geometric way. It's the landscape is fractured. In other words, it's not like there's just it's not like the beach, like the way a beach is eroded. It's that it pops up in all these different places, and those places get bigger, and they close out the remaining habitat. So a lot of these animals don't just need a certain amount of, just like, oh, here's the resources I need. They need space. They need continuous tracts of land. Anyway, what I have noticed in looking at this issue a lot is that when you put a season on something, it creates a team of people who will always go to bat, who will put their money up, who will put their energy up, who will put labor up, who will do the work to preserve that thing. Unfortunately, that's the way it is right now. I mean, I wish that it was some other driver, but it's just, that's how it works, right? So to me, that's like the anti-hunter's paradox. What will happen to these animals? Or you could be like, with vegans, I always go like, what do you want to do with all the cows? You just want to turn them out? Where do you want them to go? Because you don't want them fenced up. Boy, that's sure immoral, according to you guys. So where do we want to? What are we just going to set them free and watch the wolves eat them? Like, where do they go?
Yeah, particularly if you were in the western states, could you imagine just letting the cows go?
All the animals go? That's not the answer.
And you watch all these wild predators go, wait, what?
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I don't know. I think that it's funny to me to call it the hunter's paradox because how long we've been, because we were hunting before we were a species.
Right.
I sometimes try to say that to people. I don't know if it lands. Like, to me, when I say that, I'm like floored by the concept. Like, before we were, like, we had fire before we were a species.
Oh yeah, our species has a common ancestor with other hominins that existed before Homo sapiens, and they were hunting and had fire.
It's like hard to tell any Homo sapien to stop, since the first Homo sapiens
Sure.
did this behavior.
Stop breathing.
Yeah, exactly.
Stop eating.
Exactly.
You're
Yeah.
Can you make that hot? Just
But the idea, I think, that the people, and it's also helpful in the way that it's helpful sometimes to think about, because it can get frustrating when you have like critics on social media, for instance. And then if you could see them all, we've talked about this before, if you could see them in their mom's basement drinking, Mountain Dew in the middle of the night, waging some war against you over like some comment you made, where it's like, oh, like reading the comments, it can feel like, wow, maybe that's my equal out there. Like, we've talked about when you give a public talk and you imagine everybody in the audience is like an astrophysicist who's going to analyze every word you say for inaccuracies. So it's the same. It's like, oh man, so I'm being criticized here. And you read the criticism, you're like, but it doesn't make sense. But you don't see the person. But if you saw the person, you'd be like, oh, I can completely disregard this criticism. This person's not qualified really to criticize me.
you can't speak about some of these things from a knowledgeable perspective if your life is spent watching YouTube videos. It doesn't mean that there aren't other things that you can't be knowledgeable about. It doesn't mean that you're a bad person. It doesn't mean anything of the sort. Just we have social media as a platform for everybody's ego to be able to talk about things that they have an opinion on but have very little knowledge on.
Right.
And I'm one of those people that if you don't know very much about it, you should go learn about it before you
especially before you make real strong statements, black and white statements. Okay,
that's all ego. That's all ego.
But let's look at everything at the individual level.
Yeah.
But my point was, similarly, once you realize that the outspoken anti-hunter has less ecological knowledge than, or on par with the dominionistic hunter,
right?
Then it's like, oh, that's going to change how I feel about how I need to defend hunting because of who I'm talking to. I want to assume that the person knows about the topic, but then this is like evidence here, like, oh, they don't.
And the problem is they still get one vote, just like you get.
Yeah, I know.
and that's where it comes back to, we all have to be these ambassadors of hunting.
Especially because if we could break it down, I don't know. So we said hunters are on average about 4% of the population. COVID's changed it a bit, but we don't have the numbers really. So let's say it's 4% of the population. Now, I'm not sure what the percentage of the population is strong, self-identified anti-hunters, but for sure do you have it?
Maybe.
Okay.
I wrote down a few numbers to make sure that we had them. And while you're talking, I will look for it.
Well, I was going to say the biggest percentage of people are going to be undecided at some level. And that's why what's going to turn an anti-hunter into a undecided or maybe pro isn't going to be an argument you make. That's not it's an internal change that has to happen.
Right.
We need to be most concerned with the people who are in the undecided category, because those are the people you said like the anti-hunter has one vote. So does that huge number of individuals who are undecided. And so how we communicate and what we put out and how we present ourselves is ultimately going to influence those folks,
Right. And that's one of the things that I think about is when there's tremendous celebration, initially just, woohoo, or those statements, I slocked that animal, I smoked him, right? It's like, well, okay, that was really amazing. You were at close distance with a high-powered weapon that you didn't build, you didn't manufacture, you didn't design, you didn't extract the ore. There was a chemical explosion using a magnified optic that you didn't make.
On a weapon that's reliability and accuracy is far beyond your capabilities.
Literally, that's a perfect way to put it. And you put crosshairs on something and you pull the trigger. That's not to say that there's no talent there. And you obviously got yourself somehow to intersect with this animal's path. But calm down, because that kind of celebratory phrases like "I smoked him," "I smoked that one," it just comes off really immature.
Yep, and callous.
And that's the stuff that that's fueling an anti-hunter sentiment.
Yeah.
Think of how it would...
Or their campaigns sometimes, too.
Think of how it would change if they saw a person just give a brief few seconds of gratitude for that animal that's going to be feeding their family before that celebration happened. I think it would change some people. Like, that person cared enough about the life of that animal that they took a moment. I mean, to me, I'm always experiencing grief with every animal that I shoot, because that animal will never walk the landscape in that form again. It has to walk it in me.
Yeah.
But it's really beautiful in that form.
Yeah. Yeah, and I just think it's also really important that it's like a muscle that needs exercising, like that compassion.
But it's almost like the modern hunter's not allowed to demonstrate it.
I was talking to the editor at large and creator of Modern Huntsman. I was telling you recently, I had him on the show, and I was saying that one of the conundrums that we face as modern hunters, and this I think wouldn't matter. Let's just say as American hunters, so wouldn't matter if you were white or black or you were Asian or whatever it was. If you, let's say you did a show like mine and you did a ceremony to honor the animal, you might get accused of cultural appropriation. You're trying to be Native American, and now you're like, how do I win?
You're right.
What do I do? So if you notice on my show, you see my approach. It's to, I don't go too far this way and I don't go too far that way, but I do bring the music down and I try to show and I express with words like gratitude and thankfulness, because I don't want people to be like, and the hunters, he was brought this up. He said the hunters will do this to you, where he's like, you'll get hunters who'll be like, come on, dude, all you did was kill a frickin' deer. And they'll make fun of you for going, showing too much gratitude.
Right. All you did was kill a deer. Okay. What if I told that person they could never hunt them again? Think of how many devastated people would exist to think that they were as if it was jail. You're never going to be able to even see that animal. It's just a deer. Like, even they hold them in higher regard, likely. Yeah. But you're right. There's this thing that it's like, if you want to show gratitude with any kind of ritual, you're stealing from a culture. I'd just like to point out that offering gratitude
is transcultural.
It's universal. So we got to
definitely cosmopolitan.
When those kind of accusations come, that needs to be called out for what it is. That's unequivocal bullshit.
Yeah, well said.
That's all it is. Yeah. And you need to ignore it.
Yeah.
We get this primitive skills is stealing from the locals, even though much of what I practice is coming from other continents. Yeah. Like the bows that I build with my students come from what is now Great Britain, right?
Which is where your ancestors are from. So it's sort of weird.
And so the question is, well, what would you rather I do? Do you want me to pretend I'm an MTV music star and just go for more homes, more cars, ego, 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 ego? Or would you like me to try to soften my path on this planet?
On the planet. Yeah.
Like, what do you want me to do? Because you're saying that you don't want me doing this, but I know you don't want me doing that.
Yeah.
I know.
Yeah, it's a catch-22, and it's also just kind of silly because no matter how domesticated of a person you are, the pathway that you came through involved stone arrowheads and bows and filtering water and
it came through
fire.
Hunting and gathering.
Yeah, all those things.
And you're shaped by it.
Yeah.
Your being is shaped by the use of these tools.
Yeah.
So you just have to get past those kind of comments are just not based in reality. Not for the topics we're talking about.
Yeah, it is just a bit of a tightrope though, because you have both sides. You have the dominionistic hunters on one side who don't want you to They're like, dude, you're making hunting too fluffy, guy.
Don't get too touchy-feely.
Yeah, don't get all weird on me, dude. And then you got
Right.
the people on the other side who are really uncomfortable with that you're even doing it. And so you're like threading a needle a little bit.
Yep.
I've been the feedback we've got on the show has been so good. I've been really, really happy because we're getting like families watching it together. We're getting a lot of like, hey, I've always watched the Outdoor Channel, but my wife has never watched it with me, and this is the only
that's
show
so
she'll watch.
nice.
Or like our kids are loving watching this, that kind of stuff where we're like, whoa, that's really neat because maybe there's this chance for us to, at least for the people who watch it, reframe the narrative a little bit such that they walk away, those undecided people. Or like even if it's like somebody, let's say somebody who's into hunting, but their partner's not into hunting, but they but that's just how they've been living. And then the partner sees a show like ours and goes, oh, I get it now why you do that. That kind of thing where you're like, oh man, we're making change.
That partner might be a really important part of the hunting equation. With me, my partner, Sarah, is the one who's taking care of the children when I go hunting.
Right.
I can't go hunting without her participation in the hunt as a caregiver.
Yeah.
And we know this.
Yeah.
I can't do it without you and you can't do it without me. We're a team. Even though I might be the only one sitting in the forest, we're still a team.
Yeah. I mean, same here. We don't have kids, as you know. That's why I get so many hot showers and paper towels. But I mean, Avani, the help that she gives me, I mean, my goodness, you see all this like collection of grinders and hotel pans and baking sheets and all the stuff that I'm like knives and all the stuff that I'm making this huge mess. And then she's right there like making sure everything's taken care of.
Sarah's like elbow deep in the organs. Like when it comes back, sometimes if I do too much of the butchering, there's like a look like, okay, get over this. This is my job.
Some of this.
This is my job. You know that you did your job. Now get out of the way.
Yeah.
I remember once it was in the winter and it had been a long time. There's no hunting really going on that we were doing, and we pick up a roadkill deer. I bring it home. It's a total surprise to her because it's been months. Hunt's been over for a long time. And Sarah's kind of, finally some action around here. And she just immediately pulls out her knife and goes to work on this.
It's like already on her belt, right?
It's so perfect.
Oh man, that's funny. Yeah, ultimately for me, I like feeding people so much. Like earlier, I cooked for you guys earlier. Grant was here for a bit. And just before you were coming, he was like, hey man, I'm kind of hungry. And I had this wild turkey soup that I had made for Avani this week. And so I made that for him. And I was just feeling like the good feelings that come from sharing.
Oh, it's the best.
This stuff that you harvest, whether it's plants or animals, all that. The maple syrup's the same thing. I mean, I just feel this joy. And so when I read that the public largely supports hunting for meat, it's like, oh, God, right. We can work with that. Like, we can work with that because and hence my show being called WildFed, that's the part I'm trying to present.
Right.
The show's really culminating around food, not around the trigger being pulled.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, you showcase that perfectly.
Well, I mean, I'm sure we can do it a lot better, but I'm just saying, it's about the food piece, and that's the piece that's
all the people coming together to enjoy that food together.
You'd have to be really strongly opposed. I can understand like vegans watching this being like, oh, that's disgusting. I understand that that's how they're going to feel, but for the undecided public,
right.
I think when they see it, it's like hard to go. When they see Samara come out and I've just taken that salmon and it's on the ice and it's bleeding because I've just cut its gills, and you hear in the background go, I prayed and I prayed, and you got it, like that, something like that.
Yes, I remember
and it's
that.
just like how what's going on in your heart if you're like not supportive of this,
Right.
I mean, we're having this thing now this year. Avani's been she's taken over I'd say about a third of the sugar bush of her trees that she goes and brings the sap back from. So we'll often go, and my trees are all on this side, so I'm over here, she's over there. And we kind of meet back up pouring the sap in the buckets. Well, she started naming trees.
I just started that this year.
I'm blown away because there's one tree. We have a little section of no man's land where I usually do them, but she knows those trees, so she'll go over there. So she named a tree that I visit, Merlin. It's one of our biggest trees, and named after an uncle of hers. And something about having a name for the tree, I know every tree really well. I know how much they produce. I can guess on which days summer, because of little microclimates, like some trees sit in colder spots than others. So I'll be like, that tree's not going to have anything today.
I can
that tree
point
will.
to the ones that are going to have
full buckets. Exactly.
Yeah.
I know them all. But when she gave a name to a tree, I didn't even mean to. I'd get there and I'd be like, hey, Merlin. Like I'd start to talk, not necessarily externally, but inside myself. I'm now in this different relationship. Yesterday, as we went around to pull the taps, she introduced me by name to a bunch of trees that I've known but didn't have names for. There's Bob and Chuck, and there's one because she speaks French. What's this one called? Gilbert. Gilbert. Anyway,
awesome.
I'm amazed. Because these are such perennial species, like they're not going anywhere. I'm not going to name the leeks we harvest. I mean, they're going. Well, I guess they are perennial, but you know what I'm saying. Like foliage is different. I take it and I don't see anything left.
Right.
Where these trees, I can see their canopies all year. I don't know. It's changing for me to have. You've always talked about this sort of like non-human personhood.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess what I'm trying to say is my relationship to these trees has really deepened, and
as a result of being fed by them.
Absolutely. That's it. And and as you and I have talked about many times with other people, when you're driving down the road and you're looking out the window and you're seeing, when you see maples and you're like, man, I'd love to tap that tree.
It's like some massive one.
How is nobody tapping that tree? And then, how about a paper birch? Like when you look at a paper birch, how much is going on for you there? It's like, man, there's food in there. Mm-hmm. One of the most incredible fuels that I've ever. How lucky are we to have birch bark to burn?
Yeah.
I never start the fire in this house with cardboard or paper or newspaper, whatever. Always birch bark, because I can gather enough throughout the growing season to just have a bunch on hand for when I need to start a fire. The baskets,
the moose calls.
The moose
right?
calls, yeah, totally. There's so much there, and so over time, as you have that with more and more and more species, man, that naturalistic thing, how can you not feel that? You start anyway. So whether it's with hunting, it's a little more challenging sometimes to bring people over, but when people see that you have that relationship with your trees, for instance, when somebody walks the sugar bush with me and they see how I interact with these trees and how I feel about them, it's like they get it, And so I want to figure out how to do that better with hunting, because that's how I feel about hunting. I mean, whenever we eat, it's just like, who's this we're eating tonight? That's what she always says. Who are we eating tonight? Because she knows, even if, obviously she doesn't remember every individual fish that I'm going to bring home as an individual, but she certainly knows each bear and each deer and its story. Mm-hmm. And so when we eat it, it's like we're loving on that individual. And if I want to figure out how to impart that to other people such that they walk away being like, man, I never thought of it like that, but that's changing something for me. Now I get how he loves it.
There's a story.
And there's no paradox.
There's a story with each hunt, with each fishing trip, with each foraging trip. And the story is so much more real and interactive than any trip into the supermarket, any trip into the farmer's market.
Oh, yeah, I know, dude.
Right? The farmers markets are, for me, a beautiful step in the right direction, because you get to meet the farmer who can tell you the story of what they did. And that means something to me. But I wasn't a participant in the story that point.
I've been trying to say it. Maybe I said, stop me if I said this the other day when you and I were interviewed together, but I was pointing out, like, in order to sell if I want a $10 flight of wine at a restaurant, that's probably just going to come out to the table. But if I buy a $300 bottle of wine, they're going to send somebody to my table to tell me a story. They're not going to let me drink that bottle without some kind of ecological knowledge to go with it.
Right.
Because how will I connect the value to that bottle, right? So he's going to come out and tell me, or he or she's going to come out and tell me about the country and the region and the slope and the direction of the angle of the sun and all this stuff, right?
Yeah, and here's this particular producer, and here are the links that they go through to make sure that those grapes are the best grapes on the planet.
And likely as I taste it, they're going to point out certain things to make sure that I'm not missing anything, so I get this full experience. It's like, that's every meal that I have is that way.
Yes.
But it's not somebody telling me. I know the story.
And it never gets old.
No way.
In fact, it's the opposite. When it becomes your baseline, then it just feels like, even when you're having relatively good food somewhere, it feels like you're at a fast food shop.
Yes. That's the problem. You could, if you just
be prepared, you're going to get spoiled.
You could give me a bison burger from that hunt you were just witness to. If you didn't tell me, you just handed me a burger, dude, I could just eat that like as if it was some kind of factory CAFO farmed, cattle. I would not know. You would know, right? But if you told me the story, then I'm going to be like, oh, I'm going to savor it. I'm going to taste it. So
I think that we underestimate the importance of humans and storytelling as a way to slow down and have reverence for this life that we're interacting with. And like you've pointed out, hunting, the whole hunt is a story. Even if you never tell anybody, you experience the story here in your intellect, here in your heart, and ultimately here
in your guts. Where all your brains are. And I guess I'll just kind of finish out that thought by saying this is really the first time in history that human beings have eaten food that they don't have a story associated to. So even right up until people started leaving, relatively recently, rural agriculture for the cities. Prior to that, we're not talking very long ago, you couldn't really separate, every once in a while maybe, but you couldn't really separate the bulk of your food from story. So you could almost, these are co-evolutionary things. Mm-hmm. So it's like, yes, it's true, like storytelling is really important to us, of course, but it's like food and story have never been dissociated before in history ever until now. And look at the impacts of that. I mean, that is crazy. Like, once you don't have a story, everything's just a commodity.
And people should recognize that food is one of the most fundamental ways you interact with the planet, because you have to do food multiple times a day.
Yeah.
It's not like I'm going to buy a house.
One time.
You might only do it once or twice in your whole life, right? And even if there are toxic materials in that house, they're not going out into the environment, into the, going to the transfer station and into the, the waste heap, so to speak, frequently. But the food and how it's prepared, what happens during its transport, its processing, and all the waste and so on and so forth, that's happening with you day after day after day, multiple times. If we could do one thing to change our footprint on this planet, for me, food is the most important one. Mm-hmm. Not just for the health of the planet, but for the health of the humans who are consuming the food.
Have you seen anything more transformative in a person's life than when they start to really think about what they eat? I mean,
the only thing maybe that I've ever seen more than that is entheogens.
Yeah, entheogens, exercise can do a lot in changing somebody's life.
But a critical examination of food.
And also, I will say that entheogens often get people to change their diet, and people often change their diet after they do entheogens.
Yes.
The two things go hand in hand. And then when you look at traditional entheogen use, it's always accompanied by some kind of diet or dietary restriction. It's like all woven through.
Yes.
And an entheogen is a thing that you eat. It's just like, this stuff is really, like, I agree with you. That's why I think, well, for both of us, we've put so much of our life energy in so many years into food. It's not just about like, it's not a culinary experience for me. It's so much more. But anyway, man, I think this piece, we've just uncovered something here. This piece about, we've talked about it before, but this piece about story and food strikes me as deeper than we're able to articulate right now. It's like we haven't thought about it as much, but there's something there that's really powerful for me, because it's not fungible. It's like, if somebody random was like, hey, would you like to trade your deer for my deer? It's like, no, they're not fungible units. Like, if you were like, hey, trade this $1 for that $1, I'm like, okay, I don't really care which one I have. They're fungible.
They're the same thing.
Yeah, they're the same value.
But my story, I don't have your story.
Yeah.
And even if you tell it, it's not the same, because I experienced this one.
You know, when somebody realizes that if they bring their deer to a deer butcher, they might not get back their actual deer, and you see that like dawn on them, like, oh, like it's not fungible for me. I need it to be my deer. Like that's the whole point of I've done all this already, like for this thing. So yeah, I guess every time when you hunt or forage, every time you serve a meal, you're like the sommelier in a way. Right?
Yes.
Yeah.
So, final brief story.
Yeah, please, man.
Okay.
Lay it on us.
So, be prepared. It's not all good.
Okay. Let me change seated positions here. Get comfortable.
So, in the North Maine woods, which is a massive area of land, primarily in the northwestern portion of the state. Most of this is paper company owned, but there is a kind of a North Maine Woods Association, so that there's camping and recreation activities, hunting, fishing, other things that are done there.
And you said that's like a transitional forest. It's sort of between the boreal forest and the. Is it?
Yeah.
Is it that high up? It's like
it's getting far enough north. A lot of it is north temperate forest. There's certainly parts of it that are truly boreal, but that north temperate forest where you're starting to lose out a lot of the species that you would see in southern Maine and southern New England, like the oaks. Yeah. The hickories are long gone, those kinds of species, and you're just dealing with those trees that can handle a lot colder temperatures, deeper snow, and that kind of thing. And so we're there, and we're getting ready for a moose hunt. And we show up a few days ahead, partly because I wanted to do tracking and maybe even some calling to the bulls to see how they're responding. And pretty quiet, just in a tent, no fire, no engines, no motors, no lights, no nothing, right? And that night is one of the most amazing nights. I'll never forget it. And it's all auditory. At one point, because we're in a kind of a maintained campground that's in an old borrow pit, a small borrow pit, but now there's sort of grass and it's grown up and it doesn't.
A what pit?
A borrow pit, a gravel pit.
Oh,
for road. It was at one point for making roads, but it doesn't look bad anymore. It's all grown back in. But if you're looking, you can tell what it is.
It was, yeah.
I can hear bull moose running through the forest, and there's branches hitting off their antlers, and it's the hardest sound to describe. It sounded like two aluminum baseball bats. There's a ring to it.
Because of the material of the antlers.
And it's a ding, 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 ding. You can just hear this as they run by. And then they're calling, and you can hear the grunts going on as they're getting closer, and they're thrashing. And then two bulls are fighting less than 50 yards, because I can see where they fought in the morning. I didn't get out of my tent at night, by the way.
It's funny how that
just like these two massive animals, like, I'm going to let you guys do what you're doing. Part of it, though, is I didn't want to unzip and scare them off. I wanted to just hear it. And they're clashing in the
at
antlers.
night in the dark.
Oh, yeah. Antlers are bashing on each other.
I didn't realize they would do that in the night.
Oh, and it was going on all night, right around this tent. And it was amazing. Next day, all the other hunters show up.
Your party or other parties?
Many parties, not mine.
Understood.
And
there's like a 1 week thing going on.
And they all have campers. Every single one of them are in a camper. They all have generators. They have party lights. Music is going. Okay. And that's not to claim that those things are all bad, but the generators in some cases ran all night.
They're loud.
They ran all night.
They smell.
Yeah. The lights were on late into the evening. The music was going. The people next to us had a drone, and they're flying it over us. You're literally in
You're not
Maine's,
even allowed to do that in a hunt, dude.
You're in Maine's wilderness.
Yeah, you won't want the warden seeing that.
And there's a drone flying over us. Right. And for the next, we were there.
It's like Californians trying to turn Austin into California.
We were there for 4 more nights, I think. Yeah. And there's not a moose around. Of course not. It's too loud. It's too loud. But then the grouse hunting started on Saturday. The bull moose hunt starts on Monday. So starting right off in the morning, kapow, the grouse are coming out to the roadsides, and many are just driving around looking for them. And then they step out of the car, load the weapon quickly, and shoot the ruffed grouse as they're coming out to the edges of the road. People shot the grouse in the campgrounds that we were in. Okay. I'm heading up the road, and I see one of the young boys. He's a teenager who was in the camp. In a different site than us. It's just a few sites. It's a pretty small camp. And he's just successfully shot a grouse, and I watch him pull the breast out and just throw the grouse over his shoulder as if it was a wrapper.
Yeah.
Do you know, like, there was not even, I can't even take the time to just sit.
That's probably a really accurate description of him seeing it like that. Like,
The rest of it
roll out of the wrapper and
was
toss
a waste,
the wrapper.
right?
Yeah.
Just throws it over his head. His shotgun shells are lying on the ground. I can see them.
Yeah.
And they're not picked up. And while all of these people were exceptionally nice to interact with, they're not bad people.
Yeah.
They have no idea the presence they brought and what happened to most of the wildlife when they arrived.
Yeah.
These folks were there to moose hunt, and had they been quieter and
moose
just a
were
little
right
more,
there.
they were right there in the campground.
Right.
And in fact, I went out the next morning before everyone showed up after hearing them and found the bull moose and was calling back. And they were right just across this branch of the Penobscot River. So the point of this is just to, like, think about your noise signature and what people see you doing, what litter you're leaving. Because again, we're ambassadors.
Yeah.
And
increasingly sharing the landscape with recreators who are non-hunters.
As available lands, available wilderness diminishes. And just think about, what would it be like if, like, I showed up next to your house and the generator went on, the patio lights went on, the radio went on, while you were looking for a wilderness experience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Wow, man, that's exactly it. You know, it's like I heard somebody recently talking about what it's like to live in Florida when spring break happens, and that's that diministic thing of, like, I'm here, like, nature's my stage, and I do my performance on it.
Yeah.
You know, I'm going to show up
as opposed to weaving yourself into
the
it,
landscape.
which is my goal.
Yeah. Yeah, and I really hope that, because I've showed you a couple things today to say, hey, this is the direction I see hunting is going, at least from the front facing side. Mm-hmm. I hope that doesn't turn out to be a sham, and, like, once you're inside, you're like, it's still that party going on. I really hope it becomes what it wishes to seem, not just seems a certain way so we can continue to get away with it. You know what I mean?
I understand, and that's a nice way to put it.
Wow. Well, how was the moose hunt, though, in the end?
We succeeded, and it was wonderful.
It's time to make moose calls now?
Soon.
Soon. Birch bark's going to be... I want to get with you on that.
My strategy, because I don't live near the North Maine woods, as I tell you, is I find the washouts where the bridges have been taken out, the roads that are gated but are still pedestrian traffic is okay. Nice thing about this section of the North Maine woods, no ATVs, and that might be universal, so I don't have to worry about people driving around these. If people can't drive in, the hunting intensity drops by 2,000,000%.
Yeah.
And we have the place all to ourselves. If you get about a mile in, if you're willing to do the work packing that animal out, you have the place all to yourself. That's my strategy.
Can you take us out with some of your smooth new moose calls? Because I think people should hear that. We'll kind of close out.
I'm so leery to do it here.
No, you're good at it.
Because the problem is, I don't sound like the other people who call moose.
Yeah, but you're sounding like the moose.
I do the moose, not what they tell me to
Tell me a quick story you told me about when you were learning.
Oh, well, that was what I was trying to figure out. How do you call moose? What do you do? What does it sound like? And I'm going and I'm listening to all these people, and they're close. They're not way off, but some of them are, ooh, and it's like, really? Is that what? And then I find a video of what a cow moose is actually saying when she's in estrus, and it's more like a nasally it's so different. And I'm like, I'm glad you have success, but I'm not going to do what you do.
Oh, it's a game of telephone. Eventually you're not even sounding like it.
And then of course eventually you actually just hear cow moose, and you start mimicking them. But it's so crazy because it's most calls don't sound like a moose to me.
Yeah. It makes me think of this analogy you've used a bunch. I've used a bunch. I got it from you. But the idea of like, if you want to know what to eat, should you ask nutritionists or should you look at what indigenous people eat as the model for what humans eat?
Even though you might need to modify that model for the modern framework.
But you should have that as a starting reference, right? So I think you framed it like, do you look at what the chimpanzee eats in the wild, or do you ask the zookeeper what to feed them?
Yeah.
Similarly, do you copy other moose calls from people, or do you just listen to what moose sound like?
And that's what I did. And I had I was fortunate. I had great responses, and I'm looking forward to when we
draw that tag. It's coming. I want to just, before you do the calls, because I want to close out with that, I want to say thanks for coming down. Thanks for being prepared and bringing this material, and nice to share a meal with you again, and looking forward to whatever we can do next. And thanks you're always just awesome to sit down with for these podcasts. So
thanks for having me.
And let's hear those moose calls.
Well, I'll just do a couple of short ones then.
Let's hear 'em.
So the bull moose, as they are either smelling or hearing the cow in estrus, are announcing their approach. And aside from, raking their antlers on trees, which really gets your heart going, they're also doing this really funny kind of grunt that kind of goes, oh. And I have no idea what it sounds like over the microphone,
I'm hearing it.
Oh. And they do this as they're advancing, and it'll get louder and louder. Oh. And you're just getting more and more amped up by this massive animal that's coming in, who's doing these grunts and raking their antlers on the trees. And when they're really wound up, of course, there's this posturing where their head rocks back and forth.
So cool,
and
right?
that is the most intimidating thing to me, because that moose is ready,
Yeah.
But the cows, it's so amazing with that long face that they have. They produce such a nasal call. And you would never think that a moose would make this noise. It's like when an elk bugles.
Yeah.
I'm always like, what the hell?
How are you doing that?
Like, what is that?
Where's that coming from?
You're not supposed to make that sound. And to me, the cow moose, it's the same thing. And it'll waver a little bit, and it obviously varies by region, but it's kind of this, and you'll do several of these in succession, and if you're lucky, you all of a sudden hear, and the bull starts coming in. And it's so amazing to think that here's this animal that, we're not that taxonomically, we're not closely related, but we're able to mimic their call without any help, because even the birch bark calls, they're just a megaphone.
Yeah.
They're not making the sound. They're just projecting it.
You're doing the exact same thing, but into the call.
Yeah. And that we're able to make calls that they can't distinguish from their own. This is amazing.
All right, everybody, I want to thank you for listening. This is a longer than normal podcast, so thanks for tuning in. And if you're the type that ever says a prayer or puts an intention out into the universe, I'm just saying, Arthur and I put in every year for our moose tags here in Maine. And if all of you listening could just focus on us drawing a tag this year, it might just happen. So,
and just think, if Daniel draws, you get to watch this on WildFed. That'd be really nice to have everyone along.
That's a solid point. That's a solid point.
Thanks for listening to the WildFed Podcast. You can help us grow the show by subscribing and leaving us a rating and review. It ensures better rankings and more advertiser interest, which translates directly into better shows, more awesome guests, and a constant stream of fresh, new content. Have a question you'd like answered on the show, or a hunting, fishing, or foraging trip you'd like to host us on? Email us at info@wild-fed.com. And be sure to visit our website, wild-fed.com, to check out the WildFed video show and store. WildFed. Food is all around you.